am Grace, 34 years old, and sitting across from my husband at our divorce settlement was supposed to be the worst day of my life. Instead, it was the moment I realized how flawlessly a trap could snap shut. My stepsister sat right beside him, her hand casually resting on his arm. She smiled a perfectly glossed coral-tinted smirk and slid 3 crisp $100 bills across the polished mahogany table. The money stopped inches from my folded hands. "Take it, Grace," she said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "I know you do not even have rent money for that depressing little studio you moved into. Consider it a charitable donation. Book a cab home. Treat yourself to a hot meal." Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth, and watch until the end to see how one single file ruined their lives forever. My husband, Spencer, leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his custom-tailored suit. At 35, as a senior wealth manager for a prestigious Manhattan investment fund, arrogance was essentially in his job description. He looked at me, not with the remorse of a man who had destroyed a decade-long marriage, but with the mild irritation of someone scraping mud off his shoe. My lawyer, Donovan, sat beside me like a statue. He did not object. He did not yell. His silence was deafening, making the opposing counsel look almost bored by the sheer lack of resistance we were putting up. I stared at the $300. Then I looked at Sienna. At 31, my stepsister had always been the golden child of our blended family, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer whose primary talent was bleeding my father's bank accounts dry to fund her organic cosmetic brand. Now, she was bleeding mine. I did not touch the money. I just smiled. It was the same quiet, calculating smile I had worn exactly 3 months ago on the night I realized my entire life was a carefully constructed lie. 3 months earlier, the air in our Manhattan penthouse had been thick with the smell of expensive cologne and simmering tension. Spencer had been in Chicago on a client acquisition trip. I had stayed behind in New York, buried in paperwork. I am a forensic accountant for an independent auditing firm. My daily life consists of finding money that people try very hard to hide. I was not looking for Spencer's secrets. I was simply doing our joint taxes. The notification had popped up on our shared cloud drive just before midnight. A misrouted automated email containing a tax Schedule K-1 form. It was addressed to a limited liability company I had never heard of named Aura Glow Organics. The designated chief executive officer listed on the federal tax document was Sienna, the primary financier holding an 80% stake with Spencer. My hands had gone cold as I pulled the corresponding routing numbers. I logged into our high-yield savings account, the one supposedly locked in a fixed-term certificate of deposit for our future home in the Hamptons. The balance stared back at me in mocking green numbers. $14,000. Exactly $450,000 had been systematically bled dry over the course of 9 months, funneled through a labyrinth of shell companies and deposited directly into my stepsister's vanity business. Spencer had not just been sleeping with my stepsister. He had stolen nearly $500,000 of my hard-earned money to finance her delusions of grandeur. When Spencer walked through the door the next morning, dropping his leather weekender bag in the foyer, I had the printed tax forms sitting on the kitchen island. "How was Chicago?" I asked, sipping my black coffee. Spencer loosened his tie, not even glancing my way. "Exhausting. The markets are volatile. Clients are panicking. The usual." "Is Sienna panicking?" I asked, sliding the paper across the marble counter. "Or is her organic lip gloss line yielding the returns you expected when you drained our savings to zero?" Spencer stopped. He stared at the paper, then at me. I expected panic. I expected him to grovel, to lie, or to beg for forgiveness. Instead, A cold, hard mask slipped over his features. The charming wealth manager vanished, replaced by the ruthless narcissist I had apparently been sleeping next to for years. "You went through my private files," he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "I was doing our joint taxes," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "You forged my signature to break the savings account early. You committed wire fraud." "Spencer." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He walked to the island, picked up the paper, and tore it in half. "You are an accountant. Grace, a glorified human calculator. You do not understand fluid capital or venture equity. The money was sitting there doing nothing. Sienna had a brilliant business model, and I capitalized on it." "You financed your mistress," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "My stepsister. I financed a winner." Spencer sneered, leaning over the counter, invading my space. "Sienna is vibrant. She is ambitious. She is alive. You sit in a cubicle for 12 hours a day looking at spreadsheets. What did you expect me to do? Die of boredom." He did not stop there. He did not even give me the chance to pack a bag. Within 48 hours, Spencer had his aggressive legal team file for divorce. He changed the locks on the penthouse, froze our remaining shared credit cards, and filed an emergency injunction claiming I was emotionally unstable and attempting to sabotage his career. He wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing. He wanted to break me so thoroughly that I would not have the energy or resources to fight back. He almost succeeded. I had walked out of that penthouse with one suitcase and my laptop, forced to rent a cramped studio apartment in Queens. But Spencer made one fatal miscalculation. He forgot what I did for a living. He forgot that while he knew how to make money look pretty for investors, I knew how to strip it down to its bones and find the rot. When the initial shock of the eviction finally settled, I did what any desperate daughter would do. I went to my father, my biological father, Howard, and my stepmother, Diane. Lived in a sprawling Connecticut estate. I drove there in the pouring rain, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I thought naively that blood would mean something. I thought that discovering their golden child was having an affair with her married brother-in-law and committing financial fraud would finally shatter their perfect illusion. I parked in their circular driveway and marched to the front door. The housekeeper let me in, and I found them sitting in their pristine, cream-colored living room. Howard swirled a glass of scotch, looking completely unbothered. Diane sat rigidly on the edge of a velvet armchair, her lips pursed tightly. I stood before them, dripping wet and shaking from the cold. "He took $450,000, I told them, my voice breaking for the first time since this nightmare began. "He took my money to fund Sienna and her makeup line. They are sleeping together, and Spencer kicked me out of my own home." Howard sighed heavily, taking a slow sip of his drink. He did not look angry or surprised. He looked profoundly inconvenienced. Grace Howard began using his deep, authoritative tone. "Let us not use harsh words like stole. Spencer is a wealth manager. He makes investments. Sometimes those investments are unorthodox and require a little flexibility." I stared at him, the air rushing out of my lungs. He forged my signature. "Dad, I am talking about federal wire fraud. Sienna just borrowed it to get her brand off the ground." Diane interjected, her voice sharp and defensive. "You know how hard she has been working on Aura Glow. The official launch is next month. If you make a massive legal fuss now, you will ruin her reputation and destroy everything she has built." "My husband is sleeping with her," I shouted, dropping the polite facade. Men stumble. "Grace!" Diane snapped back, her eyes narrowing with contempt. "Spencer is a high net worth individual under a massive amount of stress. And frankly, you have been neglecting him. You are always working late at that auditing firm. You do not dress up. You do not attend his galas. Sienna just offered him a sympathetic ear and a little excitement. You need to look at your own failings as a wife before you try to destroy your sister and her new life. She is not my sister, I said, my voice dropping to a dead, icy whisper. You are the older sibling, Howard said, setting his glass down with a heavy thud. You need to be the bigger person here. Take the settlement Spencer is offering. Do not drag this family name through the mud in a public court battle. We will not support you if you try to ruin the launch of Sienna and her company. Family reputation comes first, and you need to accept reality. They were closing ranks. They were protecting the golden child and the wealthy son-in-law, entirely willing to sacrifice me on the altar of their social standing, just as the suffocating weight of their betrayal threatened to crush me. The front door opened and voices echoed in the hallway. It was time for their usual Sunday dinner. My younger brother Leo walked in, followed by his wife Naomi. Naomi was a force of nature, a brilliant 32-year-old African-American corporate lawyer who worked for one of the most ruthless mergers and acquisitions firms on Wall Street. She possessed a razor-sharp intellect and an observational prowess that made most people sweat. Diane had always been intimidated by Naomi, masking her discomfort with passive-aggressive comments about how demanding Naomi found her career. Naomi took one look at my pale face, my red eyes, and Howard sitting defensively with his scotch. Her sharp, dark eyes scanned the room, instantly cataloging the tension. Are we interrupting? Naomi asked, her voice smooth but carrying an undeniable weight. Not at all, Diane said quickly, plastering on a fake, tight smile. Grace was just leaving. She has a lot of packing to do for her new apartment. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I walked past my father, who would not meet my eyes, and past Diane, who looked visibly relieved to see me go. But as I passed Naomi in the narrow entryway, she did not step back. She stepped directly into my path, blocking Diane from seeing us from the living room. Naomi hugged me. It was a brief, stiff embrace, but as her arms wrapped around my shoulders, I felt her slip a small, folded piece of thick cardstock into the pocket of my trench coat. Keep your head up. Grace, Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain outside. And check your pockets. I left the house without another word. I drove 3 blocks before I pulled over into an empty parking lot, my hands trembling as I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the cardstock. It was one of Naomi's heavy, embossed business cards. On the back, written in sharp, precise black ink, were 3 lines. Spencer and his firm are under review by the Securities and Exchange Commission for commingling client funds. Oraglow is a front. Look at the Cayman Trust registered under Diane and her maiden name. I stared at the ink until the letters blurred. Naomi knew. She was a corporate lawyer, and she moved in the same high finance circles Spencer did, but at a much higher and much more lethal level. Spencer was a wealth manager who thought he was a god. Naomi was the apex predator who hunted gods for a living. She could not openly assist me without creating a conflict of interest or breaching corporate confidentiality. But she had just handed me the master key to Spencer and his destruction. That night in my tiny, drafty Queens apartment, I did not cry. I did not mourn my marriage or my family and their ultimate betrayal. I opened my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and went to work. I am a forensic accountant. I do not need a sledgehammer to tear down a house. I just need the ledger. For the next 3 weeks. I barely slept. I worked my day job maintaining the facade of a broken, depressed, soon-to-be divorcee. I let Spencer and his lawyers send me intimidating emails. I let them offer me pathetic settlements of $20,000 to walk away. I let them think they had backed me into a corner, at night. I followed the digital blood trail. Naomi gave me the exact breadcrumbs I needed. I started with the offshore registry databases. As a forensic accountant, I know exactly where wealthy criminals make their mistakes. They always assume they are the smartest people in the room, and they believe their digital footprints are invisible to the rest of the world. Spencer was no exception. I traced the routing numbers from the tax form he carelessly left on our shared server. It took hours of cross-referencing public records with corporate filings, but the picture quickly became crystal clear. Spencer had not just stolen our $450,000. He had been systematically skimming percentages off the top of his clients and their investment portfolios. He manipulated quarterly statements to hide minor losses, buffering his own secret accounts by blaming market volatility. But he got greedy, and his fractional skimming triggered an internal alert. He knew the Securities and Exchange Commission was beginning to ask questions. He needed to wash the stolen money fast before the federal auditors arrived at his firm. He could not use his own accounts or anything tied to his prestigious investment firm. He needed a clean, unblemished entity with no financial history. He needed a brand with a lot of cash flow, but difficult to track inventory. He needed an organic, cruelty-free cosmetic brand run by a naive, status-obsessed influencer who would eagerly sign any legal document he put in front of her. He needed Sienna. He was using AuraGlow to launder the stolen client funds. Our life savings was merely the seed money to set up the elaborate shell structure. Sienna thought she was a brilliant entrepreneur, but she was just a willing pawn. She signed federal tax documents, fake invoices for phantom inventory, and bloated supply contracts. Every signature made her legally responsible for corporate tax evasion and money laundering. The most sickening discovery came 3 nights later as the rain pounded against the thin glass of my Queens apartment window. I followed the washed cash out of the AuraGlow corporate accounts. The money did not stay in New York. It was wired in structured increments to avoid banking alerts directly to a beneficiary account in the Cayman Islands. I dug into the registration documents for the offshore trust. It was registered under a highly specific name: my stepmother Diane and her maiden name. My parents had not just turned a blind eye to a disgusting affair between my husband and my stepsister. They had actively allowed Spencer to use their names and offshore accounts to hide stolen money. I realized then that my father Howard had been secretly borrowing money from this exact trust to pay off his own failing commercial mortgages. They did it all to fund their golden child and save their estate. They were accessories to federal financial crimes. They chose his dirty money over my life and my future. I needed ironclad proof of the initial theft to secure my divorce leverage before dropping the federal hammer. I contacted our bank requesting the authorization forms used to break our fixed-term certificate of deposit. When the digital copies arrived, I stared at the signature lines Spencer had forged my name. He did not even try to mimic my handwriting accurately. His arrogance blinded him to basic caution. I used a connection at the bank to pull the digital access logs for that specific transaction. The Internet Protocol address traced directly back to his private office server on Wall Street. The timestamp showed the transaction occurred on a Tuesday afternoon when I was physically sitting in my auditing firm in Queens, surrounded by colleagues who could serve as my alibi. I printed every single record, every routing number, every forged signature, and every offshore transfer. I compiled them into meticulously labeled folders. I needed a lawyer who could match my cold calculation. I hired Donovan, a veteran of the most vicious divorce battles in New York, when I sat in his office and handed him the preliminary evidence. He did not speak for 10 minutes. He just read the documents and smiled, a terrifying, predatory smile. I told him to let Spencer think he was winning. I wanted Spencer to feel supreme and untouchable. For weeks, I played the part of the broken, discarded wife. I wore oversized, wrinkled clothes whenever I had to attend mandatory mediation sessions. I ignored his taunting text messages telling me I was a failure. I let his aggressive legal team send me condescending settlement offers of $20,000 attached to strict non-disclosure agreements. They thought I was paralyzed by grief and humiliation. They thought I lacked the mental capacity and financial resources to fight back against a Wall Street giant. Every threatening email they sent was just another piece of evidence I added to my growing arsenal. Spencer thought his intimidation tactics were working perfectly. He believed the threat of destroying my father and stepmother would keep me compliant. He still believed after everything that I was the good, obedient daughter who would sacrifice herself to save the family reputation. He fundamentally misunderstood the woman I had become. They had already killed my family the day they chose his money over my life. Now they were just strangers caught in a blast radius. I spent my nights refining the data, building a 400-page binder that would send them all to federal prison. I cross-referenced every fake lipstick invoice with every offshore deposit I linked. Spencer and his firm directly to Diane and her maiden name trust. The trap needed to be set perfectly to catch a narcissist. You must feed their ego until they choke on it. And Sienna was about to host the perfect feeding ground. The launch party for Aura Glow Organics was fast approaching. It would be the social event of the season for her shallow circle. I had a very special delivery to make to ensure their ultimate downfall. But before I could execute my masterstroke at the upcoming launch party, I had to survive one final suffocating family dinner. Howard and Diane decided to host an extravagant pre-launch celebration at their Connecticut estate just 4 days before the main event. They sent me a pity invitation, fully expecting me to decline and hide in my queen's apartment. I accepted immediately. I needed to maintain my carefully constructed facade of a broken, desperate woman clinging to the scraps of her family. Furthermore, I needed to be in the same room as Spencer and Naomi to observe the cracks in his armor. I arrived at the estate wearing the same oversized wrinkled trench coat and flat shoes. I deliberately left my hair unstyled and wore absolutely no makeup. When I stepped into the opulent foyer, the contrast was sickeningly perfect. Sienna stood by the sweeping mahogany staircase wearing a designer cocktail dress that clung to her figure. Spencer stood right beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. They were not even trying to hide their relationship anymore. They flaunted it. A disgusting display of victory over the discarded wife. Howard and Diane beamed at them, treating Spencer like a conquering hero who had simply upgraded his life choices. We moved into the formal dining room where the long table was set with crystal glasses and heavy silver. I was seated at the far end. The absolute worst spot, exactly opposite Naomi and my brother Leo. Naomi looked immaculate in a tailored emerald green dress, her sharp dark eyes taking in every detail of the room. As an African-American corporate lawyer navigating the treacherous waters of Wall Street mergers, she possessed an unparalleled ability to read a room. She did not greet me with excessive warmth. She knew we had to play our parts. We were the only two predators in a room full of arrogant prey. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological torture. Diane ordered the private chef to serve roasted duck and poured a vintage red wine that Spencer had gifted them. Every topic of conversation was a calculated strike against my self-worth. Diane proudly discussed how many influencers had confirmed their attendance for the Araglo launch. She praised Sienna for her incredible business acumen, completely ignoring the fact that Sienna could not even balance a basic checkbook without help. Sienna giggled and leaned into Spencer, thanking him loudly for his brilliant mentorship and financial guidance. I kept my head down, staring at my plate and pushing the food around with my fork. I chewed slowly, forcing my shoulders to slump. I played the pathetic scapegoat flawlessly. "Look at you. Grace." Diane sighed loudly, her voice dripping with toxic pity. "You look completely exhausted. You really should take better care of yourself." This is exactly why Spencer felt so neglected. A man of his stature needs a partner who matches his energy, not someone who drags him down into depression. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. "I am just tired from auditing," I whispered, keeping my eyes glued to the table. The subway commute from Queens takes a lot out of me. Spencer let out a short, condescending laugh. He took a massive gulp of his wine, his fourth glass in under an hour. Maybe if you understood fluid capital, you would not be stuck riding a train with the working class. He sneered. You need to expand your horizons. Grace, look at Sienna. She saw an opportunity in the market and she seized it. That is what winners do. Winners. I glanced up briefly and locked eyes with Naomi. Her silent assessment of Spencer was devastating. She watched the slight tremor in his hand as he set his wineglass down. She noticed the beads of sweat forming along his hairline despite the perfectly air-conditioned room. Naomi knew exactly why he was drinking so heavily. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not just send polite emails when they investigate commingled client funds. They freeze assets. They interrogate junior partners. They turn a man's professional life into a paranoid nightmare. Spencer was terrified, and his aggressive boasting was nothing but a fragile shield. Naomi decided to test the structural integrity of that shield. She leaned forward, resting her elbows elegantly on the table. Spencer, she began, her voice smooth and conversational. I was reading a fascinating brief today about federal compliance in venture equity. With Aura Glow expanding so rapidly, how are you handling the offshore distribution channels? I know the regulatory agencies have been absolutely ruthless this quarter regarding offshore beneficiaries. The dining room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Spencer froze halfway through reaching for the wine bottle. His jaw tightened, and the color drained from his face. Sienna, oblivious to the lethal corporate trap Naomi had just set, simply smiled. Oh, Spencer handles all the boring bank stuff for me, Sienna chirped. I just focus on the brand aesthetics and the organic ingredients. Naomi did not look at Sienna. Her dark, piercing gaze remained entirely fixed on Spencer. It must be quite the juggling act, Naomi pressed, her tone perfectly innocent, but her eyes screaming danger. Managing $500 million for your wealth fund while personally navigating international tax law for a cosmetic startup. You must have a phenomenal legal team ensuring nothing gets flagged by the federal auditors. Spencer swallowed hard. A visible pulse throbbed in his neck. He forced a rigid smile and poured himself more wine, spilling a few drops on the pristine white tablecloth. We operate within the highest standards of compliance. Naomi, he said, his voice slightly breathless. My firm has nothing to worry about, and neither does Oraglow. The capital is completely secure. I am so glad to hear that, Naomi smiled, taking a slow sip of her water. The federal auditors lack a sense of humor when it comes to sudden liquidity movements. Howard, oblivious to the deadly crossfire happening at his own dinner table, clapped his hands together. Enough business talk, he declared cheerfully. Tonight we celebrate family and the incredible success of my youngest daughter. We are going to take the market by storm. I looked down at my plate again, hiding a genuine smile. Howard had no idea that his name and his wife's maiden name were tied to a toxic Cayman Islands trust. He had no idea that the money funding his lavish lifestyle was stolen from my accounts and Spencer's clients. The suffocating family dinner continued with endless toasts to Sienna and her fake empire. But I no longer felt trapped. I felt completely empowered. Naomi and I did not speak a single word to each other for the rest of the evening. We did not need to. Her silent interrogation had confirmed everything my forensic audit had uncovered. Spencer was cracking under the federal pressure. He was a desperate man balancing on a tightrope of financial fraud, and the wind was about to blow him straight into the abyss. When the dinner finally concluded, I politely thanked Howard and Diane for their hospitality. I endured one last mocking smirk from Sienna and one last pitying glance from my father. I walked out into the cool night air, wrapping my oversized trench coat around myself. I got into my cheap rental car and drove back to my tiny apartment in Queens. The stage was perfectly set. The golden child and the arrogant wealth manager were walking blindly toward their own execution. I had a launch party to crash. But before I could crash that party, I had to process the weapon I had just been handed. before I actually walked out the front door of my father's estate that night. I had one final interaction that cemented Spencer and his inevitable doom, when Howard had cheerfully declared an end to the business talk at the dining table. I had excused myself to get a glass of water from the kitchen. I needed a moment away from the suffocating smell of roasted duck and Diane with her expensive perfume. The kitchen was a massive expanse of stainless steel and white marble. The private chef had already packed up and left for the evening. I stood by the industrial sink, gripping the edge of the cold stone counter, letting my shoulders drop. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. The heavy wooden swinging door pushed open. Naomi stepped into the kitchen. She let the door swing shut behind her, cutting off the sounds of laughter from the dining room. She did not walk to the refrigerator. She walked straight to me. Her heels made sharp clicking sounds against the tile floor. "You play the victim very well." "Grace," Naomi said, her voice a low, controlled murmur. "If I did not know you better, I would almost believe you were actually defeated by those people in there." "I have no idea what you mean," I replied, keeping my voice flat and my expression carefully blank. Naomi crossed her arms over her tailored emerald green dress. "Please, I am a corporate lawyer. You are a forensic accountant. We both hunt for a living. Spencer thinks he destroyed a housewife. He does not realize he declared war on an auditor. But you are flying blind right now. The business card I gave you weeks ago was just a breadcrumb. You need the actual map to burn him to the ground." Naomi reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. She held it out to me but did not let go when I grabbed the other end. Her grip was iron tight. Vanguard Equities is secretly auditing Spencer and his entire portfolio, Naomi explained, her dark eyes locked intensely on mine. "We noticed irregularities in our institutional accounts 3 months ago, minor percentage drops that he blamed on market friction. But the algorithms flagged a pattern. He is slicing fractions of a percent off high-yield trades and funneling them into a holding account. From there, the money vanishes offshore." I stared at her, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the corporate crime. "And Aura Glow is the washing machine," I whispered. "Exactly," Naomi confirmed, finally releasing the flash drive into my palm. "But the brand is just the middleman. The ultimate destination is a Cayman Islands beneficiary trust. The trust is registered under Diane and her maiden name to avoid direct scrutiny from federal regulators scanning Spencer and his immediate family. He needed a clean name with a history of old money wealth to avoid triggering international banking alarms." I gripped the cold metal of the flash drive. My mind raced, piecing together the financial puzzle. "Why are you giving this to me? Naomi, if your firm is auditing him, why not just hand him over to the federal authorities directly?" Naomi let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Because Wall Street hates a public scandal. Vanguard Equities wants to handle this internally. They want to force Spencer to quietly resign, confiscate his domestic assets to cover the missing margins, and sweep the entire mess under the rug to protect our firm and its reputation. But I refuse to let him walk away with a slap on the wrist. I refuse to let him ruin your life and use my father-in-law and his estate as a criminal shield without facing federal prison." She stepped closer, her presence commanding and absolute. Inside that drive is the complete ledger of the Cayman Trust. It contains the international routing numbers, the timestamps, and the digital signatures of every wire transfer Spencer executed. It also contains the loan documents showing how Howard has been secretly borrowing from that very trust to save his failing commercial real estate portfolio. They are all tied together in a neat little criminal bow. The federal investigators will not need to dig for evidence. You are going to hand it to them on a silver platter. "They chose to protect him over me," I said. The reality of my family and their betrayal settling into my bones like lead. My own father took stolen money to save his business while letting Spencer throw me onto the street. "They chose greed," Naomi corrected sharply. "And now they are going to pay the ultimate price for it. You have the ammunition." "Grace," Now you need to wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. Do not strike until he has nothing left to hide behind. Let him stand on that stage at the launch party and declare his fake victory. Let him feel like a king before you take his crown. I slipped the flash drive into the deep pocket of my oversized trench coat. The weight of it felt like a loaded weapon. Thank you. Naomi, I said, my voice steady and cold. I will not waste this. I know you will not. Naomi smiled, a brief, lethal expression. Now go back out there and look pathetic. Do not give them a single reason to doubt their own arrogance. She turned and walked back through the swinging door, seamlessly transitioning back into the role of the polite visiting daughter-in-law. I waited exactly 2 minutes before following her out, saying my final goodbyes, and executing my exit. When I locked the door of my queen's studio later that night, I immediately booted up my encrypted laptop. I inserted the silver flash drive. A massive spreadsheet populated the screen. Naomi was not exaggerating. It was a masterpiece of corporate espionage. Row after row of fraudulent transfers stared back at me. Spencer had moved nearly $4 million of Vanguard Equities client funds through Aura Glow. The cosmetics company ordered inventory that did not exist, paid marketing invoices to shell vendors, and funneled the clean money directly to the Cayman Trust. I opened the subfolder labeled with Diane and her maiden name. There it was, the smoking gun. Sienna and her digital signature acting as the chief executive officer authorizing the offshore deposits. And beneath that, the loan disbursement document signed by my father, Howard, legally tethering his commercial properties to the laundered money. I spent the entire night cross-referencing the corporate ledger with my own forensic findings from our joint accounts. I merged the data mapping out the entire criminal enterprise with undeniable mathematical precision. Every single dollar was accounted for. Every single lie was documented. I saved the master file to 3 separate encrypted offline drives. The preparation was complete. I closed my laptop as the morning sun began to filter through the cheap blinds of my apartment. I had everything I needed to destroy them all. Having the raw data was only half the battle. Raw data is just noise to a judge unless structured into a weapon. As a forensic accountant, I know a federal prosecutor will pursue the millions stolen from clients, but the family court judge presiding over my divorce would only care about one specific number: $450,000. That was the marital money. I needed to isolate my money from the massive web of Spencer and his corporate laundering scheme. I needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had engaged in the malicious dissipation of marital assets. I opened a master spreadsheet labeling it Project Avalanche. I started with the day the certificate of deposit was broken. Bank records showed the penalty fee for early withdrawal was charged on a Tuesday. The funds were instantly transferred into a holding account under Spencer and his individual name. He commingled the joint funds into a personal account before washing them. The money sat for 3 days. I checked his travel itinerary. He had claimed he was at a golf retreat in Florida. I cross-referenced the dates with Sienna and her social media posts. She had posted a photo of a room service breakfast tray featuring 2 coffee cups at a luxury hotel in Manhattan on that exact Wednesday morning. The affair and financial theft were inextricably linked. On Friday, the $450,000 was fragmented into 20 different transactions. Spencer used a classic structuring technique known as smurfing. He broke the sum into smaller increments of $22,500 to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements. He wired these amounts to 5 regional banks scattered across the tri-state area. Each account was opened under a different shell company name, but all listed Oraglow Organics as their parent corporation. He thought this digital maze would confuse a standard divorce lawyer. He assumed I would be too busy crying to look at routing numbers. I cracked my knuckles tracing the Smurf deposits. The regional bank accounts did not hold the money long. Within 48 hours, the funds were aggregated again, moving directly into the primary operating account for Oraglow. This was the critical junction where marital savings transformed into corporate capital. I opened the vendor ledgers Naomi provided on the flash drive. I needed to see exactly how Spencer and Sienna justified the sudden influx of nearly $500,000 to their fake brand. The invoices were laughably amateurish. Spencer generated purchase orders for organic raw materials from a supplier located in Eastern Europe. There were charges for shea butter packaging materials and exotic botanical extracts. Running a reverse search on the supplier and corporate registration number yielded nothing. The supplier did not exist. The warehouse address listed on the invoices belonged to an abandoned strip mall in New Jersey. Sienna had signed off on every single one of these phantom invoices. Her signature authorized the payment of our life savings to a ghost company. I highlighted the digital signatures. Sienna was an active participant in fraud. By signing those purchase orders, she was legally testifying that Oraglow was receiving tangible goods. But the money sent to the ghost company was immediately routed straight to the Cayman Islands Trust registered under Diane and her maiden name. Spencer used our marital savings to stress test the laundering pipeline before pushing stolen client funds through the exact same route. My $450,000 was the guinea pig for his federal crime. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my tired eyes. The audacity was breathtaking. Spencer took the money we saved for our future and used it to pay the offshore setup fees, the retainer for shady international lawyers, and the initial deposits required to open the Cayman Trust. He used my money to build the vault where he planned to hide his stolen millions with his mistress. I began building visual flowcharts. I created a stark red line tracking the money from our joint bank account directly to the broken certificate of deposit. The lines splintered into the 20 Smurf transactions mapped clearly with dates and routing numbers. The lines converged again at the Oraglow operating account. Then I placed a massive picture of Sienna and her signature on the fake vendor invoices serving as the bridge to the final destination, the Cayman Islands Trust. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. My coffee was completely cold, and my back ached from hunching over the keyboard. But the adrenaline surging through my veins made me feel invincible. I had successfully isolated the marital assets. I had absolute, undeniable proof of dissipation. Under state divorce laws, when a spouse uses marital funds for an affair or illegal activities, they are required to reimburse the innocent spouse 100% of the dissipated amount. Not half. All of it. I did not just want the money back. I wanted punitive damages. I wanted the judge to look at Spencer and see a monster. To do that, I needed to completely dismantle the emergency injunction he had filed against me. He claimed to the court that I was emotionally unstable and prone to sabotage, painting himself as the victim of a hysterical wife. I needed to prove his entire divorce filing was a preemptive strike designed to cover up a felony. I opened a new tab on my browser, pulling up the original divorce petition Spencer and his aggressive legal team had served me. I read through the condescending language, the demands for a quick settlement, and the strict non-disclosure agreements they were repeatedly trying to force down my throat. The non-disclosure agreement was the most telling piece of the entire puzzle. It was exceptionally broad, demanding absolute silence regarding all of his personal and business financial structures. They were utterly terrified of the truth. I compiled the flowcharts, the forged vendor invoices, and the offshore routing numbers into a secure file for Donovan. I would not show this powerful hand until the absolute final moment of the mediation. Spencer needed to sit in that room and confidently offer me pennies. He needed to firmly commit to his lies on the official record before I dropped the heavy guillotine. The trap was fully constructed and ready. It was armed to completely destroy him. But I needed to understand the exact scope of the federal threat bearing down on his neck. Naomi had explicitly mentioned that Vanguard Equities initiated a secret internal audit because they noticed irregularities. The Securities and Exchange Commission was already circling his portfolio. I dug back into the flash drive, focusing on the communications folder Naomi provided. The emails were a goldmine of absolute panic. Spencer had been communicating with a sketchy compliance officer who was quietly tipping him off about the federal inquiry. Regulators were probing specific offshore accounts Spencer managed. They noticed a pattern of fractional skimming. Spencer had been shaving micro percentages off massive institutional trades. To clients, these looked like standard administrative fees, but across massive portfolios. These fractions equaled millions in stolen capital. When federal regulators investigate, they freeze assets and demand documentation for every offshore transfer. Spencer knew the heavy hammer was falling. He needed to justify the sudden movement of millions of dollars out of his domestic accounts to the Cayman Islands. That is when I found the compliance waivers. To move certain protected marital assets and commingled funds into offshore investment vehicles. Spencer needed my explicit legal consent. I stared at the scanned portable document format files on my screen. Spousal consent forms, risk acknowledgement waivers, indemnification agreements. All of them bore my signature. I zoomed in on the ink strokes on my high-resolution monitor. It was not just a lazy scribble like the one he used to break our certificate of deposit. He had actually tried to copy the specific loops and slants of my handwriting. But he missed the pressure points. A forensic document examiner would spot the hesitation marks instantly. He was attempting to make me a co-conspirator in his money laundering scheme. If regulators raided him, he planned to use these documents to claim I was mutually responsible for the discrepancies. The aggressive divorce filing suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It was not just about his pathetic affair with my stepsister. It was a highly calculated legal maneuver. By filing for a contested divorce and pushing an aggressive non-disclosure agreement, he was building a firewall. He wanted to officially separate our liabilities. He intended to walk away clean, leaving me legally tethered to the forged consent forms. If the federal agents came knocking, he could play the victim of a bitter ex-wife who had secretly mismanaged their funds out of spite. It was a masterclass in sociopathic self-preservation. But Spencer was not the only one committing felonies. I turned my attention back to the Oraglow Organics ledgers. Sienna was equally guilty. I cross-referenced the dates of the forged spousal consent forms with the cosmetic brand invoices. On the exact same day, Spencer forged my name to move funds offshore. Sienna signed a series of massive consulting fee agreements. These documents officially contracted Spencer as an independent financial advisor for her makeup company. The retainer fee was exorbitant. She was legally authorizing the transfer of stolen client funds into her company under the guise of legitimate business expenses. Sienna was not just a naive influencer playing dress-up. She was an active participant in federal wire fraud. She signed her name right next to his, sealing their criminal partnership. She thought she was building a glamorous cosmetics empire. In reality, she was building her own prison cell. She was too obsessed with the lavish lifestyle and the sudden influx of cash to hire her own lawyer or read the fine print. Spencer handed her a pen, and she gladly signed away her freedom for a taste of high society. The pure audacity of their plan fueled my determination. I spent the next 2 hours compiling the forged spousal consent forms and matching them with the authentic signatures from my actual tax returns and employment contracts. I created a side-by-side visual analysis proving the glaring discrepancies. I documented the specific internet protocol addresses used to upload the forged documents to the banking portals. Once again, the digital footprints led straight back to his private office network. Every single screenshot I took was another nail in his coffin. I exported the metadata from the files to verify the exact time of creation. The timestamps proved he created the fake invoices during his supposed golf retreat. I meticulously organized the entire web of lies into a presentation format that even a jury with no financial background could instantly comprehend. It was purely methodical and completely devastating to his entire defense strategy. I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over me. For years, I had played the role of the supportive, quiet wife. I had tolerated the condescending remarks from Howard and Diane. I had ignored the subtle disrespect from Sienna. I had allowed Spencer to belittle my career because I valued peace over conflict. But there was no peace left to keep. They had weaponized my loyalty and tried to turn me into a federal scapegoat. I took a deep breath, letting reality settle into my bones. The fear that paralyzed me when I discovered the empty accounts was completely gone. In its place was a cold, calculating resolve. I was no longer the discarded spouse begging for scraps of affection from a family that despised me. I was the architect of their ultimate ruin. Every single piece of evidence was locked in. I packaged the dossier on the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation and the forged spousal consent forms into a secure folder. I sent it to Donovan with a simple message stating we have federal wire fraud and forged compliance documents. Prepare to draft a letter to the authorities, but hold it until my signal. I closed the laptop and watched the morning light fill my apartment. The massive storm was coming for them, and I was bringing the lightning now. I had to stay strong today. Mediation was scheduled for 10. I needed Spencer to believe he had completely destroyed my spirit. I stood in front of the cracked mirror and curated my appearance. I chose a gray sweater that swallowed my frame. I skipped makeup, letting the dark circles under my eyes take center stage. I rubbed my eyes until they turned bloodshot. I brushed my hair flat. It was flawless. When I arrived at the conference room, Spencer was already there. He sat at the mahogany table, casually checking his email. His lawyer, a slick man named Caldwell, sat beside him arranging legal documents. My lawyer, Donovan, sat quietly on my side of the table. We had rehearsed this. Spencer glanced up as I took my seat. A flash of disgust crossed his features, followed quickly by a smug smirk. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see. A broken victim. Let us get straight to the point. Caldwell, my client is offering a generous settlement to expedite this unfortunate process. We are prepared to offer $20,000. In exchange, your client will sign a non-disclosure agreement waiving her right to any future claims against my client. We also require a waiver of alimony. I kept my head bowed down. The trembling was an intentional manifestation of fear. $20,000. I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. That barely covers a few months of living expenses. We built a life together for 10 years. Spencer, how can you erase me? Spencer sighed, resting his elbows on the table. He looked at me with absolute contempt. We built nothing. Grace, I built a life. You just existed in it. You contributed nothing to my wealth, and you are entitled to none of it. If you drag this out to trial, my legal team will bury you in fees. Take the money and go quietly. I let a single tear roll down my cheek and sniffled, reaching for a tissue. Donovan shifted in his seat. My client needs time to review this proposal. Caldwell, Donovan said, his tone flat. This is a highly restrictive agreement. You are asking her to sign away her fundamental rights under severe emotional duress. She has until Friday. Caldwell snapped, closing his folder. After that, the offer drops to 0 and we proceed to court, where we will highlight her emotional instability. We have sworn affidavits from family members stating she has been acting maliciously since the separation. My breath caught in my throat. Spencer had already manipulated Howard and Diane into signing legal documents against me. They were actively helping him destroy me to protect Sienna and her empire. The betrayal cut deep. But I did not break character. I wiped my nose and nodded meekly. I just need a few days, I murmured. Spencer stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Take all the time you need before Friday. Grace. But understand, this is the end of the road. You played a stupid game trying to audit my life and you lost. Be smart for once and sign the papers. He walked out, Caldwell trailing right behind him, when the heavy glass doors clicked shut. I dropped the crumpled tissue. The tears stopped instantly. My trembling hands became perfectly still. I looked over at Donovan. They took the bait, Donovan said quietly. He thinks he has you completely cornered. He feels absolutely zero threat from our side. He handed us the rope, I replied, my voice reverting to its normal cold clarity. Now we just let him tie the knot. When I left the building, the cold wind hit my face, but I felt entirely warm inside. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a call from my father, Howard. I let it ring 3 times before answering, ensuring my voice sounded sufficiently raspy and weak. "Hello, Dad?" I answered softly. "Grace," Howard said, his tone carrying that familiar, heavy disappointment. "I spoke with Spencer this morning. He told me he offered you a very fair settlement today. I hope you are not planning to be difficult about this." "Dad?" "He took everything," I whimpered. "He wants me to sign an agreement that gags me forever. He took our savings. He made an investment." Howard corrected sharply. "Sienna is launching her brand on Saturday. The family needs peace right now. We cannot have you creating a toxic environment with a messy divorce. Take the settlement deal. Grace, if you fight this, you will lose. And we will not help you pay your legal debts. Be a good sister and let this go." I closed my eyes, absorbing the sheer venom of his words. He was prioritizing a fake launch party over his own daughter. He was protecting a federal criminal because that criminal funded his lifestyle. "Okay, Dad," I whispered, injecting a pathetic tremor into my voice. "I understand. I will not cause any trouble. I am just so tired of fighting." "Good," Howard said, sounding immensely relieved. "That is the smart choice. We will talk after the launch party." He hung up without saying goodbye. I lowered the phone from my ear and smiled a dark, predatory smile. They all believed the performance. They all thought the war was over and that they had won. They thought they had successfully swept the discarded daughter under the rug. They had no idea that my silence was not a white flag of surrender. It was the quiet pulling back of a bowstring. I had 3 days until the launch party. 3 days to prepare the final strike. The broken victim routine had served its purpose flawlessly. I headed toward the subway, my mind racing with financial ledgers. The game was escalating and I held all the cards. Saturday arrived with the crisp air of a Manhattan evening. It was the night of the Aura Glow Organics launch party. The venue was an exclusive rooftop space in Soho. Renting it for a single night cost more than what most people earned in an entire year. I knew this perfectly because I tracked the offshore wire transfer. My stolen life savings had paid for the expensive open bar and the massive custom silk banners. Getting inside the building was surprisingly simple. Spencer and Sienna believed they were operating far above my comprehension. They hired premier security and implemented a strict digital guest list. But Spencer had a fatal flaw. He used the same password for his personal email and his event planning accounts. I had logged into the portal 2 days earlier and quietly added my name. I walked right past the velvet ropes simply by showing my identification. They handed me a VIP wristband. I slipped the wristband into my pocket. I stepped onto the rooftop and the sheer audacity hit me instantly. The lighting cast a warm, golden glow over the wealthy attendees. Waiters circulated with trays of expensive champagne and delicate appetizers. A string quartet played modern pop songs, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the financial crime happening in plain sight. Everywhere I looked tonight, I saw my money, the towering ice sculptures, the lavish gift bags stacked near the exit. It was a monument to their greed and my supposed defeat. I had dressed for the occasion with calculated precision, while the other guests wore designer gowns. I wore the same oversized wrinkled trench coat from my mediation session. I wore scuffed flat shoes. I avoided makeup entirely. I needed to look like a ghost haunting their perfect celebration. I needed to look like the broken, discarded wife who crashed the party out of pathetic desperation. The contrast between my appearance and the opulent surroundings worked perfectly. As I moved through the crowd, People instinctively stepped back. I kept my head down, letting the whispers start. I found a shadowy spot near a decorative pillar that offered a clear view. From there, I watched the family dynamic unfold. Howard and Diane stood near a private cabana roped off for very important people. They looked like royalty. Howard held a glass of scotch, laughing loudly at a joke. Diane was practically glowing. She wore a diamond necklace, working the crowd with practiced elegance. She introduced herself to beauty influencers, boasting about her brilliant daughter. She had completely erased my existence from her narrative. To these people, she only had one daughter. Then I spotted them. Spencer and Sienna stood at the center of the venue, surrounded by a circle of sycophants. Spencer looked incredibly handsome in a bespoke tuxedo, holding a martini glass with absolute authority. He was playing the role of the visionary financial backer, the genius who had discovered a diamond in the rough. Sienna clung to his arm, laughing brightly at his comments. She wore a custom silk gown that hugged her figure perfectly. The dress shimmered under the golden lights, a physical manifestation of stolen wealth. She wore the diamond ring Spencer had bought with our joint funds, displaying it prominently. They were not hiding their relationship. They were celebrating it. They were flaunting their victory over me to the entire world. Watching them, I felt no jealousy. I felt no heartbreak. The emotional attachment I once had to Spencer had been surgically excised by the blunt force of his betrayal. Instead, I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. They were standing on a trapdoor, and they had no idea I was currently holding the lever. I watched Spencer sip his martini, his eyes scanning the room to ensure everyone was admiring him. He thrived on the attention. He needed the validation of this wealthy crowd to silence the internal panic caused by the ongoing federal audit. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, projecting absolute solvency, while his corporate accounts were bleeding out. I stayed hidden in the shadows, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I observed the specific guests they were entertaining. I recognized several faces from Vanguard Equities. Spencer had actually invited clients from his investment firm to the launch party of his money laundering front. The arrogance was staggering. He was using this event to assure his clients that his investments were solid. He was parading his fraudulent brand right in front of the people whose money he had stolen to fund it. It was a dangerous high-wire act, and he was performing it without a net. The evening progressed, and the volume of the party grew louder. The champagne flowed freely, loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions. I saw Diane pull Sienna aside, adjusting a stray lock of her hair, and kissing her cheek. It was a moment of pure maternal pride and affection. A moment I had spent my entire childhood desperately trying to earn. I watched my stepmother beam at the daughter who was sleeping with her son-in-law. The moral bankruptcy of my family was on full display, illuminated by luxury lighting and fueled by stolen funds. Sienna eventually broke away from the crowd and signaled to the event coordinator. The string quartet stopped playing, the ambient music shifted, and the overhead lights dimmed slightly, drawing all attention to the main stage. A spotlight hit the center of the stage. The crowd murmured in anticipation, turning their focus to the steps. It was time for the keynote address. It was time for Sienna to claim her stolen crown. I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on the thick manila folder hidden inside my oversized trench coat. I stepped out of the shadows and began to move slowly toward the front of the stage, making sure my pathetic appearance was impossible to ignore. The setup was complete. She thought she was invincible, but the floor was about to collapse beneath her feet forever. Sienna stepped into the bright circle of the spotlight. The wealthy crowd erupted into loud applause. She held a microphone in one hand, and Spencer held her other hand, guiding her up the short steps. She looked every bit the successful founder, glowing with stolen wealth and unearned confidence. She waited for the applause to die down before bringing the microphone to her lips. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," Sienna began, her voice amplified across the rooftop and dripping with artificial sweetness. Oraglow is more than a brand to me. It is a dream realized. It is a testament to what happens when you surround yourself with the right people. A dream built on family, on love, and on incredible sacrifice. She paused intentionally, letting the weight of her words hang in the cool night air. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and then they stopped. She locked eyes with me. I stood near the back wearing my oversized, wrinkled trench coat, looking entirely out of place among the designer gowns and tailored suits. Instead of ignoring me or calling security, Sienna saw an opportunity. Her narcissistic craving for dominance took over. She wanted the ultimate public humiliation. I actually want to take a special moment tonight to thank someone very specific, Sienna said, projecting her voice even louder. The crowd turned, following her line of sight until hundreds of eyes landed directly on me. I want to thank my older sister, Grace. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by a thick, uncomfortable silence. People recognized the scandal. The wealthy elite love gossip. And the story of the wealth manager leaving his wife for her younger stepsister was premium entertainment. Grace, I know this transition has been incredibly hard for you. Sienna continued, her tone shifting to mock sympathy. But I want to thank you publicly for stepping aside, for realizing that Spencer and I were simply meant to be, and for allowing us the space to build this beautiful empire together. We could not have funded this dream without your very generous financial sacrifices. A wave of quiet laughter rippled through the VIP section. Diane stood near the cabana, looking immensely proud of her daughter for delivering such a vicious blow. Spencer raised his bespoke martini glass in my direction, a smug, mocking toast to his conquered enemy. They were humiliating me, confirming the affair and the financial ruin while wrapping it up as a beautiful story of destiny right to my face in front of his most important clients. I did exactly what they expected a broken woman to do. I kept my head bowed low, allowing my shoulders to sag. I shrank away from the spotlight, pulling my coat tighter around my body. I turned on my heel and walked briskly toward the exit doors. The crowd parted for me, parting like I had a contagious disease. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors, leaving the rooftop and entering the quiet carpeted hallway that led to the elevator bank. I heard the heavy doors swing open again behind me. Spencer could not resist the urge to twist the knife in private. His ego demanded total submission. He jogged down the hallway and intercepted me just as I reached the elevators. He planted his hand on the metal doorframe, physically blocking my escape. "You really should not have come here," Grace Spencer said, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. He looked me up and down, taking in my scuffed shoes and flat, unstyled hair. "You look completely pathetic. Did you honestly think crashing this party and making a sad little scene would change anything? The divorce is final next week. Take the 20 grand my lawyers offered and disappear before I make sure you leave with absolutely zero." I did not yell. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the carpeted floor. I fumbled wildly with my oversized purse, letting my hands shake violently. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Please, Spencer," I whispered, injecting a desperate tremor into my voice. "Just let me go home." Assumption. As I frantically dug through my bag searching for my keys, I purposely let a thick, heavy manila folder slip from my grasp. It fell from my hands and hit the marble floor with a loud, resonant slap. It landed perfectly face up, directly between his expensive Italian leather shoes. The bright red logo of a prominent Swiss offshore bank was stamped boldly across the top right corner. Beneath it, printed in terrifyingly large black ink, was the header Offshore Entity Audit Oraglow, LLC, and Cayman Beneficiary Trust. Appended to the bottom of the page was the official seal of the Federal Regulatory Compliance Division. Spencer glanced down out of pure instinct, his eyes locked onto the bright red logo. The smug, triumphant smirk vanished from his face in a fraction of a second. The healthy flush of alcohol and victory drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a pale, sweating corpse. He stopped breathing. His entire body went rigid. He lunged forward, dropping to his knees to grab the folder. But I moved faster. I smoothly placed my flat, scuffed shoe squarely over the center of the document, pinning it to the marble floor. I bent down and picked it up with steady, entirely unshaking hands. My manufactured tremor was gone. "Oops," I whispered. I finally lifted my head and met his eyes directly. The terrified, defeated ex-wife vanished. The ruthless forensic accountant was staring back at him. My posture straightened. The calculated, icy calm of a predator taking control of the room radiated from my stance. "Where did you get that?" Spencer demanded, his voice dropping to a panicked, breathless hiss. He scrambled to his feet and grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging desperately into my skin. "What is that? Grace, tell me what that is right now." "It is fluid capital Spencer." I smiled, echoing his own gaslighting words from the morning he tore up the tax form. I yanked my arm free with a sharp, forceful twist, breaking his grip entirely. "You told me I did not understand how venture equity worked. I decided to educate myself. It turns out I am exceptionally good at tracking stolen money across international borders." He stumbled back, hitting the wall beside the elevator. He was hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he stared at the folder in my hand. He knew exactly what it contained. He knew it held his forged signatures, the fake vendor invoices, and the exact routing numbers that linked his client's stolen funds to his mistress and her fake cosmetics brand. "Enjoy the party, Spencer," I said, my voice echoing cleanly in the empty hallway. "The federal agents are going to absolutely love the hors d'oeuvres." The elevator chimed loudly, signaling its arrival. The polished steel doors slid open. I stepped inside, keeping my eyes locked on his terrified face. He reached a shaking hand out toward me, but his legs refused to move. The doors slid shut, severing his line of sight, leaving him trapped in the hallway with the horrifying realization that his entire empire was already dead. I rode the elevator down to the lobby, the heavy folder tucked safely under my arm. The night air hit my face as I walked out onto the bustling Manhattan street. I knew exactly what would happen next. I had violently rattled the cage and the rat was going to panic. I hailed a cab and headed straight back to my apartment in Queens. I needed to prepare the audio recorder. The final confrontation was coming to my doorstep tonight. I unlocked the deadbolt to my Queens studio and stepped into the pitch-black apartment. The silence of the room was a sharp contrast to the pulsating bass I had just left behind in Manhattan. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I needed the darkness to focus. I walked straight to the small kitchen counter and plugged my phone into the charger. I opened the voice memo application and ran a quick audio test, setting the device precisely in the center of the wooden coffee table. The microphone was highly sensitive. It would pick up a whisper from the hallway. It would certainly capture the screams of a desperate man. I opened my laptop and connected to my secure virtual private network. To understand a financial criminal, you do not need to be in the same room as them. You just need to watch their digital keystrokes. I logged into the shadow portal I had created, which mirrored Spencer and his administrative access to the Oraglow operating accounts. The screen illuminated my face in the dark apartment. The panic began exactly 14 minutes after the elevator doors had closed on him. I watched his username pop up on the active user ledger. He was logging in from his mobile device. He was probably hiding in a bathroom stall at his own launch party, frantically trying to assess the damage. His digital movements were completely erratic. He opened the offshore transfer logs. He tried to delete a batch of vendor invoices. He attempted to wipe the internet protocol history from the Tuesday transaction. It was a pathetic display of technical illiteracy. He did not realize that enterprise-level accounting software creates an immutable backup of every single deletion attempt. By trying to erase the evidence, he was actively generating a secondary log of obstruction of justice. My burner phone buzzed on the desk. It was an encrypted message from Naomi. She was still at the launch party mingling with the Vanguard Equities executives. She was my eyes and ears on the ground. Her first message was brief. "The groom is bleeding out." He just sprinted back onto the rooftop looking like he swallowed poison. I smiled and typed back asking for specifics. Naomi sent a rapid series of updates over the next hour. Spencer had abandoned Sienna during a crucial networking introduction with a beauty magazine editor. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey directly from the catering bar, bypassing the bartender entirely. When a senior partner from Vanguard Equity approached him to ask about quarterly projections, Spencer actually snapped at him. He told one of his most important institutional clients to back off because he was dealing with a massive corporate emergency. The golden facade was cracking violently in front of the exact people he needed. IP Cabana. She did not understand why her brilliant wealth manager was sweating profusely and ignoring her investors. She tried to grab his arm to pull him onto the dance floor, and he physically shoved her hand away in front of 50 guests. Diane and Howard were doing aggressive damage control, telling everyone that Spencer was simply battling a sudden migraine. But wealthy investors are like sharks. They smell blood in the water. Naomi noted that 2 of the Vanguard partners had already left the party early, their expressions dark with suspicion. I turned my attention back to the laptop monitor. Spencer had escalated from trying to delete files to trying to move capital. He was initiating an emergency wire transfer, attempting to pull remaining liquid funds from the Oraglow domestic account and shove them into a completely different offshore shell. He was too panicked to remember basic banking regulations. Moving amounts over $10,000 to an unverified international account at midnight on a Saturday automatically triggers a high-level fraud alert. I watched the status bar on the transaction spin. He was trying to move $1.2 million. The screen flashed red. Transaction denied. Account frozen pending compliance review. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. He was officially locked out. The banking algorithms had slammed the vault door shut. He had no access to the domestic funds, and he knew I possessed the audit trail for the offshore trust. He had 0 leverage and 0 liquidity. He was a king without a kingdom, standing in the middle of a party he could no longer afford to pay for. The messages from Naomi stopped around 100 in the morning. Her final text was a simple warning. He just stormed out of the venue through the service elevator. He left Sienna crying by the ice sculpture. He is coming for you. Grace. I closed the laptop and pushed it under the sofa. I walked into the small kitchen and filled the kettle with water, turning the stove on low. I wanted a cup of tea. The mundane act of boiling water grounded me. I moved to the living room and sat down on the edge of the cheap fabric sofa. The only light in the apartment came from the street lamp outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the peeling wallpaper. I checked the battery on my phone. 100%. The red recording icon pulsed steadily on the screen. The trap was armed. Spencer had built his entire career on intimidation and manipulation. He believed that whoever yelled the loudest controlled the reality of the room. He was accustomed to bullying junior analysts and screaming at customer service representatives. He expected me to cower the moment he raised his voice. He expected the good, quiet wife to crumble under the weight of his masculine aggression. He did not understand that I had already grieved the death of my marriage. I had already survived the rejection of my father and stepmother. I had nothing left to lose and absolutely everything to gain. The fear that had kept me silent for years was completely gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical desire for absolute justice. The digital clock on my microwave shifted to 1:45 in the morning. The street outside my window was quiet. The occasional rumble of a passing garbage truck was the only sound breaking the silence of the outer boroughs. Then I heard it. The screech of expensive tires taking the corner too fast. A heavy luxury sedan slammed to a halt directly in front of my apartment building. I heard the aggressive slam of a car door echoing in the narrow street. Heavy, frantic footsteps approached the front entrance of the building. He did not bother buzzing the intercom. He forced his way through the broken security door downstairs. The heavy thud of his expensive leather shoes pounding up the narrow wooden staircase vibrated through the floorboards of my studio. I took a slow sip of my hot tea. The footsteps reached my floor and stopped right outside my door. The final act was about to begin. A heavy fist slammed against the cheap wood of my apartment door. The entire frame rattled under the sudden, violent impact. The blows were rhythmic and incredibly forceful. He did not bother calling my name or demanding that I open up. He simply kicked the door just below the deadbolt. The wood groaned under the sheer force of his panic. He kicked it again, and the cheap metal lock splintered completely away from the doorframe. The door flew open and slammed violently against the interior drywall. Spencer stormed into the pitch-black apartment. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his ruined bespoke tuxedo. He had discarded his jacket somewhere between the rooftop party in Queens. His bow tie was gone, and the top 3 buttons of his crisp white shirt were torn open. He was sweating profusely despite the cool night air. The ambient light from the street lamp outside illuminated his face. He looked absolutely deranged. His eyes darted around the small studio, searching frantically for me. I sat perfectly still on the edge of my sofa, holding my cup of tea. I did not scream when he broke the door down. I did not flinch or jump up in terror. I just watched him standing in the entryway of my pathetic apartment, looking exactly like a cornered animal. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Spencer snarled, his voice echoing in the small room. He stepped forward, kicking the broken pieces of the doorframe out of his way. He paced the short distance between my television and the kitchen counter. "You think you can blackmail me? With what exactly?" Some printed out bank logos. "You are a low-level auditor. Grace, you have 0 clearance to access those files." I set my teacup down on the wooden table right next to my phone. The red recording light pulsed steadily in the darkness. "I did not access your firm and their private files," I said calmly. "I accessed public offshore registries. You were sloppy. Spencer, you left digital fingerprints all over the automated tax distributions." He lunged forward, crossing the room in 2 massive strides. He grabbed me by the shoulders and hauled me up from the sofa. His fingers dug viciously into my skin. The smell of expensive whiskey and sheer terror radiated off his body. "I will destroy you," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I will bury you in litigation. I own you. Do you honestly think anyone is going to believe a bitter, dumped housewife over me? I manage $500 million in assets." "You embezzled $500 million in assets," I corrected him, my voice completely flat. I refused to react to his physical intimidation. I stared directly into his bloodshot eyes. "You took $450,000 of my money to set up the shell company, and then you funneled your clients and their missing margins through the lipstick company of your mistress. She signed every single document," Spencer yelled, violently shaking me. His ego and his panic were completely overriding his sense of self-preservation. He needed to prove he was smarter than me, even as his world collapsed. "Sienna and her name are on the limited liability company. Diane and her name are on the Cayman Trust. I structured it perfectly. If you take this to the federal authorities, you do not just take me down, Grace. You take your whole family down. Your precious father goes bankrupt. Your stepmother goes to federal prison for tax evasion. Sienna takes the fall for the wire fraud. I am completely insulated." I stared at him in the darkness. He had just handed me a full, uncoerced confession, detailing his exact strategy of framing my family to protect himself. He was proud of it. He was bragging about using my blood relatives as a human shield against the Securities and Exchange Commission. "They chose you," I said softly, making sure the microphone captured every single syllable of our exchange. "They threw me out onto the street to protect you and your stolen money because I am a winner." Spencer shoved me hard. I fell backward, landing awkwardly on the sofa cushions. He stood over me, pointing a trembling finger right at my face. He was breathing so hard he sounded like he was choking. "You drop this right now. You sign the divorce settlement tomorrow at the mediation. You take your 20 grand, and you sign the non-disclosure agreement. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will ensure Howard and Diane lose their house by Friday. Do you understand me? I looked up at him, maintaining absolute silence. My lack of emotional response unnerved him. He was used to women cowering or crying when he raised his voice. He did not know how to handle a woman who looked at him like he was already a corpse. "You think you are so smart," he spat, turning his back on me and pacing toward the broken door. "You think because you found a few routing numbers you hold the power. My accounts are frozen because of a temporary compliance glitch. My lawyers will have the domestic funds unlocked by Monday morning. When they do, I am coming for everything you have left. I will make sure you never work in accounting again. I will make sure you are homeless." He stood in the doorway, his chest heaving as he glared at me one last time. "You have until Friday. Grace, sign the papers or I burn your entire family to the ground." He did not wait for an answer. He turned and stormed out of the apartment, the broken door swinging uselessly on its hinges. I listened to his heavy footsteps pounding down the wooden staircase. I heard the aggressive slam of his car door and the screech of his tires as he sped away into the night. I sat in the dark for a long time. The adrenaline slowly faded, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. I leaned forward and picked up my phone. I stopped the recording. The file saved instantly. I immediately uploaded the audio file to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. Spencer thought he had played his ultimate trump card. He thought the threat of destroying my father and stepmother would keep me compliant and silent. He firmly believed after everything that I was the good, obedient daughter who would sacrifice herself to save the precious family reputation. He thought I would prioritize their country club status and their stolen wealth over my own survival. He fundamentally misunderstood the woman I had become. They had already killed my family the day they chose his money over my life. Now they were just strangers caught in a blast radius. I had the complete corporate ledger. I had the forged spousal consent forms. I had the exact routing numbers linking the stolen funds to the Cayman Islands. And now I had a crystal clear, uncoerced audio recording of the primary suspect admitting to wire fraud embezzlement and framing his in-laws to insulate himself from federal prosecution. The trap was not just set anymore. It was completely locked and loaded. Spencer had done the one thing a financial criminal should never do. He underestimated the auditor. I pulled my laptop out from under the sofa and opened my email. I attached the secure files and the audio recording to a drafted message addressed to Donovan. I did not write a long explanation. I simply typed the words. "We are ready for the settlement room." I hit send on the email to Donovan and watched the progress bar disappear. The encrypted files containing the audio recording and the entire corporate ledger were safely transmitted. I did not move from my spot on the floor immediately. I sat with my back against the cheap drywall of my studio apartment, letting the adrenaline slowly ebb from my system. The broken door frame hung uselessly beside me, letting in a cold draft from the hallway. But I barely registered the chill. I needed to ensure the audio recording was completely unimpeachable. In forensic accounting, a digital file is only as strong as its chain of custody. I pulled up a specialized audio transcript program on my laptop and fed the raw file into the system. I needed a hard copy of every single word Spencer had screamed at me. I put on my headphones and listened to his voice play back in high definition. Hearing it without the immediate physical threat standing over me made his panic sound even more pathetic. He had delivered a master class in self-incrimination. I typed out the exact timestamps for his most damning statements. At 2 minutes and 14 seconds, he explicitly admitted to embezzling client funds from his wealth management firm. At 3 minutes and 7 seconds, he confirmed he forged Sienna and her signature on the shell company documents. At 4 minutes and 12 seconds, he openly bragged about using Diane and her maiden name to shield his Cayman Islands trust from federal investigators. Finally, at the very end of the recording, he issued a direct threat of financial ruin against my father and stepmother if I refused to comply with his illegal demands. He had tied the noose, secured the blindfold, and kicked the chair out from under himself. All I had to do was hand the recording to the judge. My phone rang sharply on the coffee table, making me jump. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. The caller identification displayed Donovan. He was an early riser, but calling before dawn meant he had reviewed the files I sent. I answered the phone. "Good morning, Donovan." Grace. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp devoid of any pleasantries. "I just listened to the audio file. I also reviewed the offshore routing numbers you cross-referenced with the forged spousal consent forms. Does it give us enough leverage for the mediation?" I asked, leaning forward. "Leverage." Donovan let out a sharp, humorless chuckle. "Grace, this is not leverage. This is a federal execution. Spencer just handed us a recorded confession to multi-million-dollar wire fraud and extortion. If I play this audio in the settlement room, opposing counsel will likely sprint out of the building to avoid being named as a co-conspirator. I want to destroy him. Donovan," I said, my voice entirely steady. "I want him to sit in that room and believe he has completely won. I want him to push that pathetic $20,000 settlement across the table. I want him to commit to his lies on the official record before we drop the floor out from under him." Donovan paused. I could hear him shuffling papers on his desk. He was a veteran lawyer who lived for these exact moments of legal destruction. "We will let him hang himself," Donovan agreed. "You will play the broken, devastated wife one last time. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will look at the floor. You will let him and his sister act as arrogant as they please. When the time is right, I will drop the binder. But Grace, you need to be prepared for the fallout. When the federal agents get involved, your family is going to face severe collateral damage. Howard and Diane will likely lose everything tied to that offshore trust. They made their choice when they chose his money over my survival." I replied coldly. "I am not protecting them anymore." "Understood," Donovan said. "I will see you at the mediation office at 10 o'clock. Wear the oversized coat again. It plays beautifully to the narrative of a discarded spouse." I ended the call and walked into bathroom. I stripped off my clothes and stepped into a scalding hot shower. I let the water wash away the lingering smell of Spencer and his expensive whiskey that had polluted my apartment during his break-in. I stood under the spray, methodically planning my morning. I had 5 hours until I walked into the settlement room, after my shower. I checked my secure messaging application. Naomi had sent a brief encrypted update. She was already at her corporate office preparing the final lethal blow from her end. The message read, "Vanguard Equities just terminated his employment effective immediately. His licenses are suspended. We are freezing the domestic assets as we speak. I am heading to the courthouse to file the injunction on behalf of the shareholders. See you at the settlement." The timing was orchestrated flawlessly. Spencer would walk into the mediation room completely unaware that he had just been fired. He would have no idea that his corporate email was locked and his professional reputation was currently burning to ash on Wall Street. He would walk in feeling like a king, oblivious to the fact that his kingdom had already been conquered. I dressed carefully for the final performance. I put on the same gray sweater that swallowed my frame. I left my hair damp and unstyled. I avoided makeup, letting the genuine exhaustion of a sleepless night accentuate the dark circles under my eyes. I looked thoroughly defeated. I looked exactly like a woman ready to surrender and accept whatever scraps her wealthy husband threw at her. I grabbed my canvas tote bag, ensuring my laptop and a backup physical drive containing the audio file were secured inside. I walked out of my apartment, carefully stepping over the broken door frame Spencer had destroyed hours earlier. I did not bother trying to fix it. I would not be returning to the studio ever again. The subway ride into Manhattan felt entirely different today. I watched the city rush by the window, feeling a profound sense of calm detachment. The fear, the betrayal, the deep, agonizing ache of losing my entire family. All of it had crystallized into pure resolve. They had severely underestimated the quiet accountant. They had mistaken my silence for weakness and my loyalty for stupidity. I stepped off the train and walked toward the towering glass building where the mediation would take place. The morning sun reflected off the skyscrapers blindingly bright. I took one final deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I pulled the oversized trench coat tighter around my shoulders, hunched my back slightly, and walked through the revolving doors. The stage was set. The audience was waiting. It was time to end this. I stepped into the cold conference room. The air smelled of lemon polish and expensive espresso. A massive mahogany table dominated the space. I slumped my shoulders, clutching my canvas tote. Spencer sat opposite me. He wore a bespoke navy suit and tie. No trace remained of the deranged maniac who had kicked down my door hours earlier. He looked entirely victorious. He scrolled through his phone, treating my presence like a minor administrative delay. His aggressive attorney, Caldwell, sat to his right. Caldwell wore a bored expression. Neat stacks of legal documents sat before him. To Spencer's left sat Sienna, radiating absolute entitlement. My stepsister wore a tailored cream dress. She leaned close occasionally, whispering and giggling. She wanted to make sure I understood she had completely replaced me. My lawyer, Donovan, sat quietly beside me. He offered no reassuring smiles. He maintained the grim demeanor of a lawyer watching his client get slaughtered. I sat setting my tote bag down. Caldwell cleared his throat, signaling the start. He did not look at me. He addressed Donovan directly. "We are here to finalize this dissolution." Caldwell droned. "My client is exceedingly generous to expedite this. We want to avoid a costly trial your client cannot afford. Here is our final offer." Caldwell slid a thick packet across the wood. "The terms are straightforward." Caldwell continued, folding his hands together. "My client is offering a lump sum payment of $20,000 as a final spousal support buyout. In exchange, your client will immediately vacate any remaining claims to the marital estate. She will waive all rights to future alimony. More importantly, she will sign the attached comprehensive non-disclosure agreement." I kept my head bowed, staring intensely at the grain of the mahogany table. I let my hands tremble slightly in my lap. I knew exactly what that non-disclosure agreement contained. It was a legal gag order designed to punish me if I ever breathed a single word about Aura Glow Organics, the Cayman Islands Trust, or the forged spousal consent forms. Spencer finally put his phone face down on the table. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wood. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. "This is the best you are going to get, Grace," Spencer said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You played a stupid game and you lost. You tried to audit my life, but you forgot who you were dealing with. I manage high net worth individuals. I operate in leagues you cannot even comprehend. Take the money and sign the papers. If you fight this, I will drag you through family court until you are completely bankrupt, and I will make sure your father cuts you off for good." He was referencing his midnight threat. He fully believed his violent break-in had broken my spirit. He thought his promise to ruin my father Howard and my stepmother Diane had terrified me into absolute submission. Sienna sighed loudly, a theatrical display of exhaustion. She reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a sleek leather wallet and extracted 3 crisp $100 bills. She smiled, her perfectly glossed, coral-tinted smirk. She slid the $300 across the polished mahogany table. The money stopped inches from my folded hands. "Take it." "Grace," Sienna said, her voice coated in artificial sweetness. "I know you do not even have rent money for that depressing little studio you moved into. Consider it a charitable donation from us. Book a cab home. Treat yourself to a hot meal." Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. The sheer disrespect of the gesture hung heavily in the sterile air of the conference room. Caldwell looked mildly amused by the display. Spencer smirked proudly. clearly enjoying watching his mistress humiliate his wife. They were reveling in their absolute dominance. I stared at the $300. The green ink of the bills seemed to mock me under the bright fluorescent lights. I thought about the sheer volume of stolen client funds currently sitting in their offshore accounts. I thought about my own stolen life savings and the sheer arrogance required to offer me a $300 handout from my own stolen money. I let a long, shaky breath escape my lips. I forced my shoulders to drop even further, projecting total and utter defeat. I reached out with a trembling hand and lightly touched the edge of the currency. Sienna let out a soft, victorious laugh. "Sign the non-disclosure agreement," Grace Spencer commanded, tapping his expensive gold pen against the settlement packet. "Sign it right now, and we can finally all move on. You can go back to your cubicle, and I can get back to running my empire. The clock is ticking." I slowly pulled my hand away from the money. I lifted my head and looked directly at Donovan. Donovan did not say a word to me. He did not nod. He simply reached down to the floor beside his chair and picked up his heavy leather briefcase. He placed it squarely on the table. The metallic snap of the briefcase latch's opening sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "We reject the $20,000, Donovan said, his voice low and gravelly, breaking his long, calculated silence. "We reject the non-disclosure agreement. And we absolutely reject the premise that your client holds any leverage in this room." Caldwell frowned, sitting up straighter. "What are you talking about, Donovan? Your client has no assets and no grounds to contest. If you refuse this offer, we go to trial and she gets nothing." Donovan reached slowly into his open black briefcase. His large, weathered hands tightly gripped a massive stack of paper. It was not a standard legal brief. It was the massive 400-page binder I had painstakingly compiled over the last 3 long weeks, meticulously mapping out every single detail of their financial crimes. Donovan lifted the massive binder out of his briefcase with both hands. He raised it a few inches above the polished mahogany and let it drop. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel striking wood, rattling the crystal water glasses sitting in the center of the table. Sienna jumped slightly in her chair, her hand flying to her chest. Spencer blinked, his confident smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second before he forced it back into place. Caldwell leaned forward, adjusting his glasses to read the blank cover of the binder. "We are not here to negotiate a $20,000 buyout," Donovan stated, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man holding a royal flush. "We are officially filing for a 100% reimbursement of the dissipated marital assets totaling $450,000. We are also seeking punitive damages and complete coverage of all attorney fees. Furthermore, we are refusing any non-disclosure agreements." "Ni samai." Spencer let out a harsh, barking laugh. He looked at Caldwell and shook his head. "This is pathetic. You are wasting my time. I already explained the situation to the court. The money was lost in a high-risk venture investment. It is a marital loss. Grace shares the burden of that loss. You cannot squeeze blood from a stone. Donovan, the funds are gone." "A high-risk venture," Donovan repeated slowly, savoring the words. He reached out and flipped open the heavy cover of the binder. "You mean Oraglow Organics?" Sienna stiffened. Her hand dropped away from her diamond ring, and she sat up rigidly in her chair. "We have acquired the complete forensic audit of the limited liability company," Donovan stated, sliding the first thick packet of documents across the table toward Caldwell. "This includes the Internet Protocol login history for the authorization of the wire transfers that drained my client and her life savings. Spencer, you claim to the court that my client authorized the breaking of your joint certificate of deposit. However, the network logs prove the authorization traces directly to your private firm server on Wall Street. The timestamp shows the transaction occurred on a Tuesday afternoon. On that exact date and time, my client was physically swiping her security badge at her auditing firm in Queens. Caldwell picked up the papers. His eyes scanned the highlighted network logs and the timestamps. The fake tan on his face suddenly seemed to clash with the pale shade his skin was turning. "That is purely circumstantial," Caldwell interrupted, though his voice lacked its previous arrogant bite. "Anyone could have accessed that terminal." "Is it circumstantial?" Donovan asked, turning to the next tab in the binder. "Because we also have the banking records showing the immediate transfer of those funds." Spencer did not just move the money. He actively engaged in smurfing. He broke the $450,000 into 20 separate transactions of exactly $22,500 to avoid triggering federal reporting thresholds. He wired these amounts to 5 regional banks using shell companies that all list Aura Glow Organics as their parent corporation. Spencer clenched his jaw. A visible pulse began to throb at his temple. "You hacked my private accounts," he hissed, glaring at me with pure hatred. "You committed a cybercrime, Grace. I will have you arrested for this." I kept my face perfectly blank. I did not break my silence. I let Donovan handle the execution. "My client did not hack anything," Donovan countered smoothly. "These are corporate filings and public offshore registry databases mapped by a licensed forensic accountant. But the trail does not stop at the regional banks. Within 48 hours, the smurfed funds were aggregated into the primary operating account for Aura Glow Organics." Donovan pulled out another stack of papers featuring the bright pink logo of Sienna and her cosmetic brand. He pushed them toward the center of the table. "These are vendor invoices," Donovan explained. "They authorize the payment of nearly $500,000 to a raw material supplier located in Eastern Europe. The warehouse address listed on these invoices belongs to an abandoned strip mall in New Jersey. The supplier does not exist. It is a ghost company. And yet the chief executive officer of Aura Glow signed every single one of these fraudulent purchase orders." Donovan pointed a thick finger directly at Sienna. Her signature was highlighted in bright yellow ink on every page. Sienna stopped breathing. Her eyes widened in absolute terror as she stared at her own handwriting on the fake invoices. She whipped her head around to face Spencer. "You told me those were marketing write-offs." Sienna panicked, her voice shrill. "You told me it was just standard tax restructuring for the brand launch." "Shut your mouth, Sienna." Spencer snapped viciously. He grabbed her arm and squeezed it hard. "Do not say another word in this room." Caldwell was sweating now. He pushed the documents away from him as if they were physically on fire. He was a divorce attorney, not a criminal defense lawyer. He recognized federal wire fraud when it was placed right in front of him. But my client did not just stop at stealing marital assets. Donovan continued relentlessly, turning to the final section of the binder. "We tracked the money moving out of the ghost company. The funds were immediately routed to a beneficiary account in the Cayman Islands. A trust registered under a very specific name. Diane and her maiden name." Spencer stood up violently. His chair scraped backward and crashed into the wall behind him. "This mediation is over," he shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You obtained these financial records illegally. They are completely inadmissible in family court. You cannot use stolen documents to force a settlement. I am leaving, and I am filing a motion for sanctions against both of you." Spencer reached down to grab his briefcase. He tugged at Sienna, pulling her up from her chair. "We are leaving right now," he ordered her. Caldwell did not stand up. He sat frozen, staring at the offshore routing numbers. "Spencer Caldwell," said his voice barely a whisper. "Spencer, sit down." "I am not sitting down," Spencer yelled, practically dragging Sienna toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. "This is a pathetic bluff. They have nothing that will hold up in front of a judge. They were not obtained illegally." A new voice rang out from the doorway, stopping Spencer dead in his tracks. The heavy double doors of the conference room swung open inward. Everyone turned to look. The arrogant wealth manager, clutching his terrified mistress. stood face to face with the absolute worst nightmare a financial criminal could ever encounter. Naomi Vance stepped across the threshold. She wore a tailored slate gray suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase. As an African-American corporate lawyer representing one of the most ruthless mergers and acquisitions firms on Wall Street, she commanded the room instantly. She did not look at me. Her dark, piercing eyes locked directly onto Spencer. They were obtained through a legal discovery subpoena filed 48 hours ago in federal court, Naomi stated, her voice smooth and completely devoid of mercy. Spencer took a heavy step back. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He recognized her. He knew she was the senior counsel for Vanguard Equities, his absolute largest institutional client. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like chalk. "Sit down," Spencer Donovan ordered, his voice slicing through the tension. "You are not leaving this room because we are not finished." Spencer slowly released his grip on Sienna. He walked backward and slumped heavily into his leather chair. He looked completely hollowed out. Caldwell refused to look at his client, staring instead at the ceiling with a grimace. Donovan opened the next section of the massive binder. "Let us discuss the exact mechanics of the dissipation of marital assets," Donovan said. "Moving nearly $500,000 of joint funds into an offshore shell company requires extensive compliance documentation. Domestic banks do not just let that kind of capital cross international borders without proper spousal authorization. Under state divorce laws, when a spouse uses marital funds for an illegal enterprise or an extramarital affair, they are required to reimburse the innocent spouse 100% of the dissipated amount, not half. All of it." Donovan pulled out 3 crisp sheets of paper. He laid them side by side on the mahogany table. "These are risk acknowledgement waivers and spousal consent forms," Donovan explained. "They are federally mandated documents required to legally transfer commingled marital funds into offshore investment vehicles. They were submitted to your banking institution to authorize the $450,000 wire transfer." Donovan pointed to the bottom of the pages. "They all bear my client and her signature." Spencer swallowed hard. The pulse in his neck was beating frantically. "She signed them," Spencer croaked, his voice incredibly weak. "She knew about the transfer. She agreed to the venture investment." I finally spoke. My voice was a blade of solid ice cutting through the thick, stifling air of the room. "I did not sign anything, Spencer." Donovan pulled out a transparent plastic overlay. It contained a perfect digital replica of my actual signature pulled from my verified tax returns and employment contracts. He placed the transparent sheet directly over the signature on the spousal consent form. A forensic document examiner would spot the hesitation marks instantly. Donovan noted, "You tried to copy the specific loops and slants of her handwriting, but you missed the pressure points. The signature on the consent forms is a clumsy forgery. You did not just steal her life savings, Spencer. You committed identity theft and federal wire fraud to do it." Caldwell pushed his chair back from the table. The screech of the legs against the floor was loud and jarring. "Spencer Caldwell," said, his voice shaking with furious indignation. "Did you submit fraudulent financial affidavits to this court? Did you forge her signature to hide marital assets?" Spencer did not answer. He stared at the forged documents as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. "He did exactly that." "Caldwell," I said, maintaining my cold stare. He needed to wash the stolen money fast before the federal auditors arrived at his firm. But he needed my explicit legal consent to move the protected marital assets. He knew I would never agree, so he forged my name. He attempted to make me a co-conspirator in his money laundering scheme. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. The aggressive divorce filing suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It was not just about your pathetic affair with my stepsister. It was a highly calculated legal maneuver. By filing for a contested divorce and pushing an aggressive non-disclosure agreement, you were building a firewall, You wanted to officially separate our liabilities. Sienna was shaking violently in her chair. She looked back and forth between Spencer and the forged documents, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. You intended to walk away clean, leaving me legally tethered to the forged consent forms. I continued relentlessly. If the federal agents came knocking, you could play the victim of a bitter ex-wife who had secretly mismanaged the funds out of spite. It was a masterclass in sociopathic self-preservation. Spencer gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were pure white. "You cannot prove I signed those papers," he hissed desperately. "Anyone could have forged them. We do not need to guess who forged them." Donovan replied cleanly. "Because we exported the metadata from the files to verify the exact time of creation. The timestamps prove you created and uploaded the fake invoices and the forged consent forms during your supposed golf retreat in Florida. The internet protocol addresses match," Clear's throat, "your secure login credentials perfectly." I turned my gaze to Sienna. She was practically shrinking into her tailored cream dress, trying to make herself invisible. "But Spencer was not the only one committing felonies," I said. "Sienna, you are equally guilty." Sienna let out a high-pitched gasp. "I did not forge anything, Grace. I swear to God I did not sign your name." "No," I agreed. "You signed your own name." Donovan pushed another set of documents across the table. I cross-referenced the dates of the forged spousal consent forms with the cosmetic brand invoices. Donovan explained. "On the exact same day, Spencer forged my client and her name to move funds offshore. You signed a series of massive consulting fee agreements. Sienna." Donovan tapped the paper sharply. "These documents officially contracted Spencer as an independent financial advisor for Oraglow Organics. The retainer fee was exorbitant. You legally authorized the transfer of stolen client funds into your company under the guise of legitimate business expenses." "I did not read them," Sienna cried, tears spilling down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. "He just handed me a pen. He told me it was standard corporate paperwork. He said I was the chief executive officer and I needed to authorize the marketing budgets." "You signed your name right next to his," I said, my tone merciless. "You sealed your criminal partnership. You thought you were building a glamorous cosmetics empire. In reality, you were building your own prison cell. You were too obsessed with the lavish lifestyle and the sudden influx of cash to hire your own lawyer or read the fine print." Sienna covered her face with her hands, sobbing loudly. "He manipulated me. He used me." "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for federal wire fraud," Donovan stated bluntly. "By signing those purchase orders, you were legally testifying that Oraglow was receiving tangible goods. But the money sent to the ghost company was immediately routed straight to the Cayman Islands trust registered under Diane and her maiden name." Caldwell stood up. He began rapidly shoving his legal pads and pens into his briefcase. He looked completely disgusted. "I am officially withdrawing as representation in this matter," Caldwell announced loudly. "I will not be party to federal financial crimes. I am submitting my withdrawal to Judge Harrison immediately." "Caldwell, wait!" Spencer begged, standing up and reaching out toward his lawyer. "You cannot just walk out. We can fix this. We can settle." "You lied to me," Spencer Caldwell shot back, zipping his briefcase shut with aggressive force. "You submitted a perjured financial affidavit to the court under my counsel. You used me to facilitate a crime. Do not ever contact my office again." Caldwell turned on his heel and practically sprinted out of the conference room, the heavy glass doors swinging wildly in his wake. Spencer was left standing alone, abandoned by his legal defense, stripped of his arrogance, and completely exposed. The trap had closed with bone-crushing force. Spencer stared at the empty glass doorway where his lawyer had just vanished. His chest heaved with rapid, panicked breaths. He was completely alone, stripped of his legal shield, and facing the absolute destruction of his carefully curated life. He slowly turned his head back toward the mahogany table. His bloodshot eyes locked onto Naomi. She stood perfectly still, her posture radiating the lethal confidence of a corporate executioner. Naomi did not offer him a moment to recover. She unclasped her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal filings printed on heavy, watermarked paper. She dropped them directly in front of his empty leather chair. "You thought you were the smartest man in the room, Spencer," Naomi began, her voice crisp and entirely devoid of mercy. "You assumed your fractional skimming went unnoticed because the individual amounts were negligible to high-net-worth clients. But Vanguard Equities utilizes proprietary algorithms designed to catch microscopic deviations in high-yield trades. We flagged your accounts 3 months ago. The only piece of the puzzle we lacked was the exact destination of the washed funds. We knew the money was bleeding out, but we could not pinpoint the offshore holding tank." Naomi gestured toward me with a slight nod of professional respect. "Grace provided the exact roadmap we needed. Her forensic audit connected your domestic shell companies to the Cayman Islands Trust. You handed her the rope when you foolishly drained her personal savings to test your laundering pipeline." Spencer gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. "Naomi, you have to listen to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "I can fix this. I can reimburse the institutional accounts. I have liquidity in other portfolios. We can handle this internally without involving federal prosecutors. I will resign quietly. Vanguard Equities does not want a public scandal. You know how the board hates bad press." Naomi let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed off the glass walls of the conference room. "You severely overestimate your value to the firm." "Spencer, Vanguard Equities does not negotiate with thieves who steal from our primary shareholders. We do not cover up federal wire fraud to save the career of a mid-level wealth manager. We burn the infection out to protect the host." She picked up the top document from her stack and held it up for him to read. "At 8 o'clock this morning, my firm filed a massive civil lawsuit against you in federal court. We are suing you for breach of fiduciary duty, corporate fraud, and embezzlement. Simultaneously, we handed your complete transaction ledger over to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Sienna let out a high-pitched whimper, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. She was finally beginning to understand the sheer magnitude of the situation. This was not family court drama anymore. This was federal prison. Because we filed the civil suit accompanied by undeniable evidence of international money laundering. Naomi continued. "We were granted an immediate ex parte asset freeze. As of this exact moment, every single dollar you possess is locked by federal mandate. Your checking accounts are frozen. Your retirement portfolios are frozen. Your credit cards will decline if you try to buy a cup of coffee." Spencer collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He let out a low, guttural sound of pure defeat. "But the asset freeze does not just apply to your personal accounts," Naomi stated, turning her sharp gaze towards Sienna. "The freeze extends to every single corporate entity tied to the stolen funds. Aura Glow Organics is officially seized property. The domestic operating accounts have been locked by the authorities. The warehouse in New Jersey is currently being padlocked." Sienna leaped up from her chair, her eyes wide with frantic desperation. "No!" she screamed, her voice shrill and grating. "You cannot do that. Aura Glow is my brand. I have a massive launch party next. I have investors coming. I have influencers flying in. You cannot take my company." "That's all." "You do not have a company." "Sienna," I interrupted, my voice cold and flat. "You have a money laundering front. And you do not have a launch party, either, because the catering company and the venue just had their deposit checks bounced due to the frozen accounts." Sienna looked at me with absolute horror. "But my condo," she gasped, clutching her chest. "Spencer bought me a luxury condo in Tribeca. My name is on the lease. Naomi smiled a cold, predatory smile. Spencer did not buy you a condo. Sienna. Origlow Organics bought that condo using corporate funds as a business expense write-off. Since Origlow is entirely funded by stolen capital, the federal government now owns your condo. Federal marshals will be arriving at that property this afternoon to seize the assets inside. If you have any personal belongings there, I suggest you go retrieve them immediately before they change the locks. Sienna sank to the floor, her designer dress pooling around her. She hugged her knees to her chest, sobbing hysterically. Her entire influencer lifestyle, her fake wealth, her stolen boyfriend. All of it had evaporated into thin air in less than 10 minutes. She was going to be homeless by sunset. Naomi turned her attention back to Spencer, dropping the final document onto his side of the table. This is your official notice of termination. Spencer, you are fired for cause. Furthermore, we have notified the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Your licenses to trade and manage wealth are permanently revoked. You will never work in finance again. Spencer stared at the termination letter, his eyes blank and vacant. He looked completely shattered. The arrogant man who had broken down my door at 2 o'clock in the morning threatening to destroy my family was entirely gone. He was a hollow shell waiting for the federal authorities to come and collect him. You wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing. Spencer, I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the mahogany table. You told me I just existed in your life while you built an empire. You thought you could throw me out onto the street and use my life savings to fund your mistress. You thought you were untouchable. I stood up, pushing my chair back. Donovan stood up beside me, gathering the massive forensic binder and placing it securely back into his leather briefcase. I am a forensic accountant, I said, looking down at him with profound satisfaction. I build my life on finding the truth hidden in the numbers. You handed me the numbers, Spencer. You handed me the exact weapon I needed to tear your fake empire down to the foundation. Donovan snapped his briefcase shut. We are leaving, he announced, addressing the empty space where Caldwell had been sitting. Judge Harrison has all the evidence she needs to issue the default judgment regarding the marital assets. Naomi stepped back, gesturing toward the heavy glass doors. She looked at me, giving me a subtle nod of solidarity. The trap had worked flawlessly. The execution was complete. I picked up my canvas tote bag, adjusting the strap over my shoulder. I looked at Sienna sobbing on the floor and Spencer staring blankly at the wall. They had nothing left. I turned my back on them and walked out of the settlement room, my head held high, stepping into the bright hallway as a completely free woman, as the heavy glass doors began to swing shut behind me. A piercing shriek shattered the sterile quiet of the settlement room. I stopped in the bright hallway, my hand resting lightly on the cold metal handle. I had planned to walk away and never look back, but the sheer magnitude of the collapse drew me in. I pushed the door open just a few inches, allowing myself to witness the absolute destruction of the people who had tried to destroy me. Sienna was no longer sobbing on the floor. She had scrambled to her feet, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. The arrogant lifestyle influencer was completely gone. In her place stood a cornered, terrified woman who suddenly realized she was going to lose her freedom. She lunged across the space separating her from Spencer. She slammed her hands against his chest, her perfectly manicured nails catching the fabric of his expensive, bespoke suit. You told me I was completely insulated, Sienna screamed, hitting him again. Her voice echoed harshly off the glass walls. You promised me the cosmetic brand was legally mine. You said putting my name on the tax documents was just a smart corporate write-off. You lied to me. Spencer, you used me to hide your stolen money. Spencer stumbled backward, trying to grab her wrists to stop the physical assault. Sienna, shut your mouth, he hissed desperately, glancing toward the head of the mahogany table. Do not say another word in this room. Everything you say is being recorded on the official court record. You are handing them a federal confession. Sienna did not care about the court record. She only cared about her own survival. She ripped her hands out of his grip and took a step back, pointing a shaking finger directly at his face. "I am not taking the fall for your federal wire fraud," she yelled, her voice bordering on hysterical. "You are the wealth manager. You are the one who stole $500,000 from Grace and funneled it into my accounts. You forged her signature on the banking forms. You showed me the fake invoices and told me to sign them. I did not even know the Eastern European supplier was a ghost company until today. I will tell the federal agents everything. I will testify against you in federal court. I will give them every single email and text message you ever sent me." Spencer looked at his mistress with sheer disbelief. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman he had committed multiple felonies to impress, was actively throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. The twisted romance they had built on a foundation of stolen wealth evaporated in an instant. There was no loyalty among thieves. "You stupid, ungrateful brat!" Spencer spat his face, turning a deep, mottled red. "I bought you that luxury condo. I funded your entire fake life. You happily spent the stolen money on designer clothes and diamond rings. You are just as guilty as I am. The federal prosecutors will not care about your tears. You signed the federal tax documents. You are going to federal prison right next to me." Sienna let out a guttural cry of despair. She grabbed her heavy designer handbag from the table and swung it, violently hitting Spencer squarely in the shoulder. He staggered backward, tripping over his leather chair and crashing hard onto the carpeted floor. He scrambled to get up, but he looked completely pathetic. A fallen king rolling in the dirt of his own making. Enough. The single commanding word cracked through the room like a whip. Judge Harrison, who had been sitting quietly at the head of the table observing the absolute chaos, finally intervened. She picked up her heavy wooden gavel and brought it down hard against the sound block. The sharp, loud crack demanded immediate and absolute silence. Sienna froze, her chest heaving as she stared at the judge. Spencer stayed on the floor, breathing heavily, his suit jacket torn and wrinkled. "I have presided over family court for 2 decades, Judge Harrison stated, her voice radiating cold judicial fury. "I have seen spouses lie, cheat, and hide assets. But the sheer magnitude of the fraud, gross dissipation of marital assets, and blatant perjury committed in my courtroom today is entirely unprecedented." Judge Harrison stood up, picking up the massive 400-page forensic binder Donovan had left on the table. She looked down at Spencer with profound disgust. "Mr. Spencer, you submitted a sworn financial affidavit to this court under penalty of perjury, claiming you possessed limited liquidity due to high-risk venture losses." Judge Harrison continued, her voice slicing through the remaining tension. "You attempted to use the legal mechanics of this divorce settlement to force your wife into assuming liability for your criminal money laundering enterprise. You forged spousal consent forms, and you attempted to coerce her into a non-disclosure agreement to cover up federal financial crimes." Spencer opened his mouth to speak, but Judge Harrison immediately silenced him with a sharp gesture. "You currently have no legal representation in this room because your attorney correctly identified you as a severe liability," Judge Harrison stated ruthlessly. "Therefore, I am issuing a default judgment right here on the official record. I am granting the petitioner a full dissolution of the marriage effective immediately, due to the extreme and malicious dissipation of marital assets. I am awarding Grace 100% of all remaining unthawed domestic funds. I am also transferring the entirety of your remaining legitimate retirement portfolios to her to offset the $450,000 you stole from her savings. You are walking away from this marriage with absolutely zero assets." Spencer closed his eyes, letting his head fall back against the wall. The financial ruin was complete. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, setting the binder down, "I am legally obligated as an officer of the court to report any evidence of ongoing federal crimes. However, it appears the relevant authorities are already fully aware of your activities." Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open wide. Naomi Vance stepped aside, allowing 2 stern-looking men in dark suits to enter the room. They wore identical grim expressions and carried thick leather folders. Silver badges gleamed clearly on their belts. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived. "Spencer," the lead agent said, stepping toward the defeated man on the floor. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and money laundering. Stand up and place your hands behind your back." Spencer did not fight them. He slowly pushed himself off the floor, looking completely numb. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the room was the ultimate conclusion to his arrogance. The federal agents secured his wrists behind his back. The second agent turned his attention to Sienna, who was shaking uncontrollably against the mahogany table. "Sienna, you are not currently under arrest," the agent stated flatly. "However, your corporate assets are seized, and you are a primary person of interest in this federal investigation. We strongly suggest you secure competent legal counsel and accompany us to the field office for questioning." Sienna nodded frantically, fresh tears ruining her face. "I will cooperate," she babbled desperately. "I will tell you everything he did. I will give you all the passwords. Just please do not put me in handcuffs." I stood in the hallway, watching the federal agents march my ex-husband out of the settlement room. He walked past me, his head bowed, his designer suit ruined, his hands bound. He did not look at me. He had nothing left to say. Sienna trailed closely behind the agents, crying loudly, an entirely broken woman heading toward an interrogation room. I stepped back from the doorframe, letting them pass. I adjusted the strap of my canvas tote bag on my shoulder. The heavy weight of the past 10 years lifted completely from my chest. I turned around and walked down the bright corridor, leaving the wreckage of their lives far behind me. The elevator doors at the end of the bright corridor opened, and I stepped inside, severing my final physical connection to the man who had tried to destroy my life. I stepped out of the high-rise building and onto the bustling Manhattan pavement. The cold afternoon wind whipped against my face, but I felt nothing except a profound radiating warmth. I hailed a cab and headed back to my temporary apartment to watch the dominoes fall. I did not have to wait very long. By the time I turned on the evening news, the financial networks were already running the story. Vanguard Equities had issued a ruthless and highly publicized press release. They officially announced the termination of a senior wealth manager due to severe internal compliance violations, and confirmed they were fully cooperating with federal authorities. Spencer was named directly. The scandal sent massive shockwaves through the financial district. Reporters were already broadcasting live outside his office building. The Federal Bureau of Investigation did not waste a single second. Armed with the massive 400-page forensic binder Donovan had handed over to Judge Harrison, the federal agents possessed a perfect, undeniably accurate roadmap of the entire criminal enterprise. They did not have to spend months subpoenaing banks or untangling the complex web of offshore shell companies. I had already provided the index, the translation, and the exact routing numbers. The federal prosecutors simply followed the bright red lines of my forensic audit exactly as I had drawn them. The digital trail led straight from the fake cosmetic invoices of Aura Glow Organics directly into the Cayman Islands Trust. That specific trust bore the maiden name of my stepmother. The federal authorities do not politely ask questions when they suspect a wealthy family syndicate is washing. They execute rapid, unannounced search warrants. The element of surprise is their greatest weapon, and they wielded it perfectly against a family that believed wealth made them untouchable. 2 days after Spencer was led away in handcuffs, a fleet of black government vehicles pulled up the long, manicured driveway of the Connecticut estate. My father, Howard, and my stepmother, Diane, were likely sitting in their pristine, cream-colored living rooms, sipping their morning coffee and her ruined reputation. Their parental panic transformed into absolute visceral terror when armed federal agents walked through their front door and began systematically boxing up their financial records, computers, and mobile devices. The federal audit revealed the absolute depth of my father and his greed. Howard had been severely over-leveraged for years. His commercial real estate business was secretly failing. instead of downsizing or admitting financial defeat. He had been secretly borrowing heavily against the Cayman Trust to prop up his struggling commercial portfolio. He had knowingly used dirty washed money to secure his domestic mortgages and fund his lavish lifestyle. The moment the federal government seized the offshore trust, they automatically placed federal liens on every single property tied to those illicit funds. The banks holding his primary legitimate mortgages immediately panicked. They called in the loans, entirely citing the criminal investigation as a severe breach of covenant. Howard went from a highly respected real estate developer to a massive toxic liability in a matter of hours. His credit lines evaporated instantly. His business partners severed all contact, refusing to return his frantic phone calls. The construction projects he had been financing came to a grinding halt. Investors pulled their backing entirely, leaving him staring at half-built structures and mounting civil lawsuits. But the financial collapse was only the beginning of their nightmare. The federal asset forfeiture laws in the United States are entirely unforgiving. Because laundered money had been directly injected into the Connecticut estate to pay for property taxes, routine maintenance, and luxury renovations. The government officially classified the mansion as the proceeds of a crime. They seized the house. My parents were handed a legal notice and given a strict timeline to vacate the premises. The luxurious fortress where they had raised their golden child and constantly diminished my worth was now the property of the federal government. Diane faced a completely different but equally devastating kind of destruction. Her entire identity was built on her immaculate social standing. As the details of the federal indictment became public knowledge, her carefully curated world completely disintegrated. The country club where she spent her afternoons quietly revoked her membership. The charity boards she served on asked for her immediate resignation to avoid negative association. The wealthy women she considered her close friends suddenly treated her like an absolute pariah. She could no longer hide behind her expensive perfume and her passive-aggressive comments. She faced potential criminal indictment for allowing her identity to be used on an international money laundering vehicle. She was terrified, and she was entirely alone. They quickly realized they were going to lose absolutely everything. They had no access to their frozen accounts. They had no money to hire high-priced white-collar defense attorneys to keep them out of federal prison. Spencer could not save them because he was sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial. Sienna was busy meeting with prosecutors, desperately trying to secure a plea deal by testifying against Spencer to save herself from serving serious jail time. They had exactly one person left to turn to. My phone began to ring incessantly. Howard and Diane left dozens of frantic voicemails begging me to answer. They knew I had received a massive settlement. They knew Judge Harrison had awarded me the entirety of the unfrozen domestic assets and the legitimate retirement portfolios as compensation for the fraud. They assumed because I was their blood that I would swoop in and save them from the federal guillotine. They thought the obedient, quiet daughter would finally return to rescue them from their own catastrophic mistakes. They thought I would use my newly acquired wealth to hire them lawyers and buy back their seized estate. I did not answer a single call. I listened to their voicemails shift from commanding to pleading to outright sobbing. They were experiencing the exact same helpless panic they had forced me to endure when Spencer threw me out onto the street. The panic was entirely of their own making, and I was perfectly content to let them drown in it. They had nowhere left to run, and the final confrontation was rapidly approaching my doorstep. Their world was burning to ash around them, and I was the one holding the match. Their world was burning to ash around them, and I was the one holding the match. A month after the devastating settlement hearing, I was sitting in my brand new corner office in Lower Manhattan, with the recovered funds and the massive compensation payout from Vanguard Equities. I had fully secured my financial independence. Naomi had brilliantly negotiated that corporate payout to keep me from suing her firm directly for the severe negligence of their rogue employee. We used that immense capital to launch our own independent forensic accounting and corporate litigation firm. We were a lethal and highly sought-after combination. I tracked the hidden money through impossible digital mazes, and Naomi executed the ruthless legal strikes against the guilty parties. Our client waiting list was already 6 months long, and the industry respected our absolute discretion and power. I was reviewing a complex offshore ledger for a new corporate client when my desk phone softly chimed. I pressed the flashing button. The voice of my newly hired receptionist filled the quiet room. "Grace, your father and stepmother are in the lobby," she informed me, her tone carrying a hint of professional concern. "They do not have an appointment, but they are insisting it is an absolute emergency, and they refuse to leave the premises." I did not panic. My heart rate did not spike. I simply closed the financial file on my monitor and stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer and walked out of my office. I moved down the bright hallway toward the glass-encased reception area. When I pushed open the heavy double doors, I barely recognized the two desperate people standing nervously by the reception desk. Howard and Diane looked completely destroyed. The expensive designer clothes they always paraded around in were entirely gone. They wore wrinkled, off-the-rack coats that looked like they had been slept in for days. Howard looked like he had aged 20 years in a single month. His posture was slumped, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been completely extinguished by fear. Diane looked incredibly frail. Her eyes were red and severely swollen from weeks of constant crying. She clutched a cheap handbag to her chest, looking around the sleek modern office I had built with wide, terrified eyes. "Grace," Howard pleaded, stepping forward the moment he saw me. He held his hands out in a gesture of absolute desperation. "Please, Grace, we have nowhere else to go. The federal agents took the house. They seized the bank accounts. They took absolutely everything we spent our entire lives building. We are completely ruined. You have to help us." Diane cried, her voice trembling violently. "You are a millionaire now. You have your own highly successful firm. We are your family. Grace, we need a place to stay tonight. We just need a loan to get us back on our feet and hire a competent defense attorney. You cannot just leave us out on the street to fend for ourselves." I stood there looking at the pathetic people who had told me to be the bigger person while my husband stole my life savings and slept with my stepsister. These were the exact people who prioritized their country club status over my basic survival. They had aggressively demanded my silence to protect a criminal enterprise, and now they were begging for my mercy. "A loan?" I asked, my voice echoing cleanly in the quiet reception area. "You mean like a high-risk venture investment?" "I am sorry, Dad. I am just a glorified human calculator. I do not understand fluid capital well enough to lend it to you." Howard flinched as if I had physically struck him. He recognized his own condescending words being used to seal his fate. "Grace, please," he begged, his voice cracking under the weight of his humiliation. "Do not do this to us. We made a terrible mistake. We trusted Spencer and he ruined us." "No," I corrected him, my tone absolutely freezing. "You trusted the money. You knew exactly what they were doing to me, and you actively protected them because you were profiting off the theft. You used my stolen savings to pay your commercial mortgages. You are not victims of Spencer. You are his willing accomplices, and you deserve every single thing the federal government is doing to you right now." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a plain white envelope. I walked forward and dropped it squarely on the polished glass of the reception desk. "There is exactly $300 in that envelope," I said, looking directly into Diane and her weeping eyes. "Sienna gave it to me a month ago to book a cab. Take it. Use it to get to a homeless shelter." I turned my back on them and walked away. "Grace," Diane screamed, her voice shrill and echoing with sheer panic. "You cannot do this. We are your blood. You are abandoning your own family." I did not turn around. I did not break my stride. I just kept walking down the bright corridor. They were never my family. My family was Naomi, who currently sat in the corner office next to mine, fiercely reviewing a corporate contract. My family was the profound peace I felt when I went to sleep at night in my new penthouse, knowing I owed nobody anything. I closed my office door securely, blocking out the pathetic sound of their weeping. The silence that followed was absolute perfection. I walked back to my desk and sat down in my comfortable leather chair. I looked out the massive windows at the beautiful New York City skyline. I had survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable, and I had emerged completely victorious. I had dismantled their fake empire and built a real one of my own. I opened the new forensic file for my client and smiled a genuine, happy smile. Family is not defined by blood or shared last names. Family are the people who do not stab you in the back when you are not looking. And for those who do choose to betray you, well, they eventually have to pay the tax, and the bill always comes due. Have you ever had to use sheer ruthlessness to protect yourself from the people who are supposed to love you? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to save your own life? Let me know your story in the comments below. If this journey of ultimate karma and financial justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people taking their power back. Thank you for watching, and always remember to check your bank accounts. The story of Grace profoundly illustrates that sharing DNA with someone does not automatically grant them a lifelong pass to disrespect, manipulate, or betray you. For years, society has ingrained in us the idea that family is everything, and that we must endlessly forgive our relatives simply because we are related. However, this narrative teaches a dangerous lesson suggesting that we should prioritize the comfort of toxic people over our own survival and peace of mind. Grace faced the ultimate betrayal not just from a cheating and thieving spouse, but from a father and stepmother who willingly sacrificed her to protect their own financial interests and social standing. Their actions demonstrated a harsh reality. Sometimes the people who are supposed to be your safest harbor are actually the ones holding your head underwater. The most crucial lesson learned from her journey is the immense power of walking away. Cutting ties with family is often viewed by society as a tragic failure, but in reality, establishing firm and impenetrable boundaries is an act of profound self-love and self-preservation. True family is not a birthright. It is an earned privilege. It is built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and the fundamental promise not to exploit you when you are vulnerable. Grace found her true family in Naomi, someone who shared no blood relation, but showed absolute loyalty when it mattered most. By refusing to accept the role of the silent and obedient victim, Grace reclaimed her power and built a genuine life of her own making. We must all learn to stop setting ourselves on fire just to keep toxic relatives warm. Please take a moment today to evaluate the relationships in your life and set the firm boundaries you need to protect your own peace.